A crowd of angry men battled against just one man, someone who was born a warrior and was raised as a warrior by a clan that considered it an honor to sleep forever on the battlefield. Already at the edge of the cliff, the warrior shouts, Evelyn. He was speaking to a woman who held a boy in her arms and asked her to prepare the spell while he bought them time. The woman agrees and the little boy looks scared. He's our boy and he recognized his father as the most honorable warrior in the entire clan. Even in the extreme situation he found himself in, as he had been betrayed by his tribe. Still, the man fought to the end for his family and his honor, until 3 of the traitors attacked him, striking his chest. The man kept spitting people juice non-stop, and the scene left the little one horrified, screaming for his father. However, surprisingly, the man shouted that he would not lie down for those bastards and delivered a blow, knocking them out. While his father fought, the sorceress held him and chanted an incantation. Soon, the two were engulfed in an intense green light. She let go of the MC, who questioned why he was floating inside the light, and the woman explained that anywhere that star would take him would be better than this place. Smiling though tearful, she asked the boy to survive. However, the boy begged to stay with his mother, the sorceress, while crying. Hearing that, his father called to him, shifting the focus of his grief. And the elder told him to become strong, adding that he should be strong enough not to lose anything and to become so strong that no one would dare touch him. Finally, the great warrior repeated what the mother had said about surviving, showing a look full of determination. Aiden was still crying, but even so, he nodded at his father's request. In his father's eyes, a warrior who was face to face with his end, there was no fear or regret. Nothing, absolutely nothing, but pride in being a barbarian filled his eyes. In a reality far from there, a group of bullies was talking about intercepting several students who had taken the college entrance exam that afternoon. And one of them commented that Kim Jin-tae, a student leaving the exam, must have a lot of money and is encouraged to grab his backpack quickly. However, the boy said they shouldn't do that because it could bring serious trouble. To which the bully replied that the headache was already in front of them if the nerd claimed his friend would soon arrive. One of the clowns mocked him, asking if that friend was some kind of monster or what. And with perfect timing, a loud boom exploded behind him, sending bricks flying everywhere. One of the guys even commented on the wall near the group which had broken, while the group's leader was lying on the ground from the impact. Amid that confusion, a voice called for Kim Jin-tae, surprising one of the clowns. From the hole emerged a man with broad shoulders and defined muscles, and his eyes exuded hatred. Angrily, he commented that those guys were really rude. He was a student from Jonal School named Kang Childu. His figure was threatening, and the group stared at him in shock, wondering who that musclehead was and how he had broken through the wall with just one punch. Then he grabbed the opponent, stating he was Jin's friend, raising his hand to give the guy a good lesson. Said and done, he showed his skills to the 3 idiots without mercy. With the matter settled, he and Jin walked calmly, and the little one praised him, saying it was amazing that he punched a brick wall this time, and asked if the giant friend was sure he was human, which set off a warning in Kang. Nervously, he said of course he was human. However, Jin revealed he had serious doubts about that. This worried the MC. After all, it could mean he still showed signs of being a barbarian, but he quickly changed the subject. At his house, several bowls of food were stacked on the table, yet an old man asked why the boy was eating so little, worried about his health. But the boy replied that he just hadn't had much of an appetite lately, and asked why his grandfather wasn't eating. And he explained that he was too old to digest food, so watching the boy eat satisfied him. And he laughed softly, encouraging him to eat more. Without a doubt, his grandfather was the person the MC was most grateful for, as he took in a barbarian boy who had nowhere to go and raised him without asking for anything in return. Changing the subject, the old man said he received a call from Manager Park. Kang stopped eating upon hearing that, and the elder asked if he had said he wanted to become a boxer. But the MC denied it, stating that he would become an athlete. The information shocked the grandfather, who thought it was a waste, considering his grandson had won every existing award. As much as he tried, he couldn't avoid it. Humans and barbarians were completely different species. After all, Kang participating in sports was no different than having to cheat, and that went against the spirit of fair play. The boy felt sorry for his grandfather, but he knew there was only one path for a barbarian, and that was to be a warrior. And it wasn't through sports like humans did. No, it had to be fighting in unfriendly battles and against worthy opponents. His only problem was that the world was far too peaceful. While sitting outside lost in thought, he heard his old man grumbling something at the television. It was a news channel reporting on the launch of a full investigation into the unidentified disaster that happened in Chinanju. Curious, the boy went inside to ask about the event, and his grandfather explained that there had been an incident in Chinanju with over 120 victims already confirmed as dead. He continued the explanation, stating that it had to do with a monster appearing, and how it was the end times. The word monster caught the protagonist's attention. On the screen, more images of the supposed monster appeared, referring to it as an unidentified life form and asking everyone to be cautious. The boy was very stunned by the news. Noticing this, the old man called him to sit on the couch, since he was trembling too much, but the boy stammered in response. With a nervous look, Kang said he needed to go out for a bit. Far from there, he and his best friend were arguing in a car while another person asked if it was an Uber or something like that, and another said it was her first ride in the new car received from her father. It was Jintae who was driving, grumbling about it being the last time and that his friend needed to get his license, but the MC simply thanked him for the favor. That monster from the news was a creature Kang remembered very well from his childhood, and he thought it might be connected to the world he came from. When they arrived at their destination, the pair were surprised by the number of people present. That was enough to confirm the suspicion that something was happening. Jin commented that he knew it was a disaster, but the atmosphere was very intense, considering even soldiers were there, and the MC suggested it must be the disaster zone. A guy complimented our boy's good shape and asked which group he was part of. Before he could respond, the man assessed his clothing and concluded he didn't seem affiliated with any organization, handing him a card and inviting him to join them. Looking more closely at the card, Kang asked if it was some kind of meeting for warriors. The comment made the man laugh, and holding the warrior's shoulder, he said he had a great sense of humor, even with that grumpy face. Continuing, the human explained that they needed to colonize planets, so they were more like workers than warriors, and insisted he wouldn't regret joining. Something the boy understood perfectly, which is why he tore up the card and stated that he was a warrior and being a worker would be a dishonor to his class. The men were clearly stressed and called him an arrogant brat for talking nonsense and questioned how he dared reject the best opportunity of his life. The argument was interrupted by a vibrant purple wave rising behind the crowd, drawing everyone's attention. People shouted that it was starting and everyone should unite against that thing. Jin was impressed and asked what the hell that was and why it was happening out of nowhere. However, a notification window appeared in the air, glowing and announcing that the judgment of the apocalypse had begun. Our boy remained still and stunned, processing the gravity of the situation. While the little window declared that the end of the world was approaching Earth, the sanctuary planet Nova was extending its hand to help the inhabitants of Earth. Right after the message appeared, an immense amount of light formed on the ground, breaking the soil. It was an escape portal that would take them directly to Nova, which left the boy stunned by what was happening there. The light swallows Kang and Jin, and the little one screams, asking where the hell they were, while his friend had a blank expression. He yells at the musclehead, saying he should take responsibility since he was there because of him and even his car had disappeared. However, the nerd stops freaking out when a little window appears in front of him. It was about the end times test, and the objective was to obtain a goblin coin in exchange for advancing to the next phase. This leaves the boy even more confused. But the protagonist calls out to Jintae and asks him to look around. There were a bunch of goblins in their path, which makes the little one panic again, asking what those monsters were. He asks if the two of them would have to defeat them, but while he panics, his friend runs toward the creatures. He had waited a long time for this moment and smiled with a lot of energy. Finally, he could confirm how strong he really was, and he punches one of the beasts, causing a massive impact on the ground. The horde of goblins kept coming toward him, while the boy felt his blood boiling with insane excitement. It was as if he was communicating with his barbarian instincts because of the challenge. With warrior red eyes, he shouted that it didn't matter if it was really the apocalypse or something else. The creatures could bring it on. After all, maybe this was his only chance. His blows sent 3 goblins to Kingdom Come all at once. Jintae, who was nearby, watched his friend in disbelief, amazed that his friend had taken down not 2 but 3 monsters in the blink of an eye. When he takes down the last monster, it disappears in a bright blue light, catching the protagonist's attention. A coin had materialized from the light, and a little window appeared to explain that it was a goblin coin, the exclusive currency of the end times test. Then the warrior concluded it was the goblin coin mentioned in the previous window. He was amazed, and another window confirmed that the test had been completed and that he had earned the right to become a citizen of Nova by passing through the portal to enter the planet. Jintae asked what passing through enter the portal could mean. The phrase seemed enigmatic and full of implications they couldn't quite understand. After thinking for a moment, Kang pointed into the distance and suggested that if they were talking about a portal, it had to be that spinning purple thing floating over there. Sometime later, Jintae was cursing his partner while in a pitiful state. He then started shouting, saying the MC threw him into a goblin-infested place out of nowhere, like he was trying to kill him. However, our boy explained that the coins couldn't be transferred, so the nerd would have to fight to earn them himself. Still, the little one complained, saying someone like him didn't know how to fight. Their conversation is interrupted when a goblin runs toward them, ready to attack, which surprises the boy, who thought it was already over. But his friend remained calm and kicked the ground, causing the goblin to back off while stating that the fastest way to grow was to fight firsthand. Then, with a cute smile on his face, the musclehead told Jintae he wouldn't let him die, since he got him involved in this, so he would take responsibility. Even exhausted, the boy thanked him and celebrated that he had already completed the mission. Meanwhile, hidden behind some bushes, a soldier commented to his sergeant that they had found their bag, and the superior grumbled about the goblins stealing. And with a tone of disgust, he said, "Let's go over there and finish them." However, Jintae and Kang rummaged through the bag, concluding it had very useful things like combat rations, so hunger would be one less concern. As he told them to eat and keep moving, the tip of a gun pointed at his eyes. It was the two soldiers, shouting that they needed to be finished off, mistaking them for goblins. However, observing more calmly, one of them stopped. Jintae was trembling as he exclaimed that he was just a human. After the scare, they apologized for the confusion and gathered to eat. One of the soldiers asked why it was just the two of them and completely unarmed, and the friends explained they ended up there without even knowing where they were. Jintae asked if the soldiers were also participating in the end times test, which would confirm that all of this was real. The sergeant nodded, saying the government was preparing for the end times, and since the planet Nova was basically in the Stone Age, they had to build villages together. Companies and organizations were also investing in development to prepare for a new era, with competition and everything. But of course, behind the scenes, Kang then asked if there were many monsters like the ones they had seen before on Nova. And the soldier explains that that place is a kind of testing ground while Nova is the main stage, and that's why it's crucial to train here since Nova will be even more challenging. The soldiers are offering them another bag full of stuff, and Jintae thanks them for the gesture. But Kang is lost in his thoughts, imagining how the new place could be even harder than the one they're in now. And just the idea of hunting even more made him crack a devilish smile. Later that night, while hunting, Jintae asks if they could take a break, which the MC denies because after what the soldiers said, they couldn't just sit around. On the contrary, they needed to level up quickly. Nearby, he spots a ruined wooden tower with a group of goblins patrolling its base. Among them, there was one particular goblin, visibly different from the others. He had long white hair and carried a kind of staff covered in paintings. Jintae squints his eyes. I don't think it's like the goblins we faced before. It looks stronger, or at least different. And he thought it was very dangerous. But his friend was too excited about the discovery. So he charges in saying that was even better, and his presence surprises the creatures guarding the base. With just a few well-placed hits using a frying pan he got from the soldiers, the warrior takes out the goblins, drawing the attention of the Goblin King. After that, he begins to climb the tower, surrounded by a glowing red aura. Sora tells the tattooed goblin that he's coming for him. But the monster doesn't seem to care at all, provoking his rage. Suddenly, a lightning bolt strikes. Then the MC realizes that the goblin was actually a mage. Next, the lightning hits Kang, causing Jintae to scream for his friend. The creature smiles from the top of the tower, but his expression quickly changes when he hears the protagonist's voice, who, even while being completely burned by the creature, says that now things were getting good. The mage gets even more annoyed, launching another bolt of lightning at the muscle head. But he asks for more and more. He felt like the electricity was running down his spine, but he knew he could handle it. After all, he wasn't just a barbarian. He was also the son of a great shaman. As he reaches the top of the tower, Kang is surrounded by a golden light. And loud and clear, he tells the goblin that the pain that doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. Then he smashes the monster and destroys the entire tower, falling to the ground amidst the ruins. The protagonist acknowledges that he barely made it out unscathed, and that he was able to endure thanks to the magical resistance he inherited from his mother. Suddenly, coins start to float above him, and he's surprised to realize that it's not just coins. There's something more. A little window informs him that it's a mana orb, which grants a small amount of permanent mana and can be activated with 10 goblin coins. He wonders if he could gain mana like a shaman, and the mana enters his chest. The boy begins to glow inside a large golden bubble, which was incredible. It felt like he had gained unbelievable power, as if all of his previous efforts seemed insignificant. Could this be the power of the orb? Suddenly, Jintae is running toward him in a panic, shouting his name. The little one asks if his friend is okay after being struck by lightning. Seeing the preserved state he was in, he asks if Kang was really human. At that moment, the MC calls him, which triggers a warning in the boy, who asks if he's hurt or something. But the boy turns around with red eyes, saying they now needed to hunt even more, which scares Jintae. Kang says they must find the next hunting ground quickly, especially the ones with shamans that drop orbs. The nerd completely freaks out, begging his friend to stop talking like that. The next morning, Kang wakes up his partner, who rubs his eyes, only to see him sitting with a pile of glowing mana orbs in his hands. He blinks, stunned, and mumbles, "You hunted goblins all night without sleeping." To which he cheerfully replies, "I managed to grab some strength and perception orbs, not just mana ones. Dude, I can't wait to test this power." He clenches his fists, saying he felt like he had gotten insanely strong overnight, but the human just thought he was completely nuts. The conversation ends when a little window pops up, informing them that 12 hours had passed since the start of the test, and now field bosses would appear in that area. The bosses were formidable enemies that novice players couldn't face. Escaping as quickly as possible was recommended, which worried Jintae, who begged the warrior to leave through the portal immediately, but he just said this was bad, before turning around with an expression of tremendous excitement and saying he was really hyped, which the little one thought was insane. In the beginner's testing grounds, a huge creature charged toward the soldiers. It was one of the field bosses called Junior Ogre. They tried to organize themselves and fired nonstop at the ogre, but it remained untouched. Apparently, bullets were useless. The creature roared, swinging the massive piece of wood it used as a weapon before striking the two humans. However, before they could be crushed by the wooden log, Kang jumped into action, blocking the attack. The two could barely believe what was in front of their eyes, but the boy was thrilled at the possibility of fighting someone bigger than him. Determined, the MC ordered everyone to step back, saying that beast was all his. He roared, charging for another strike, landing a punch with all his strength on the massive creature. But the opponent's reaction was unexpected. The warrior expected to feel some resistance on the creature's skin or hear a groan of pain, but it was like punching a wall of solid steel. The ogre didn't even flinch. Instead, it looked down and struck the boy with its enormous fists and unreal strength, sending him flying. Meanwhile, Jinte, who was beside the soldiers, sighed, saying it was impossible his friend was being overpowered, and the others agreed it was impressive. And he added, explaining that you had to be at least rank A to stand a chance in that fight, but Kang was still on the ground. Pain exploded through Kang's body as he lay on the ground in disbelief over the force of a single punch. He concluded that his enemy was definitely stronger than him, but it wasn't the time to think. The ogre's gigantic fist came down again, intending to finish him off. This time, though, he used his instincts to dodge, determined to survive, and to do that, he had to avoid a head-on clash with the monster at all costs. So while the ogre kept trying to hit him, the MC kept dodging. It was definitely a strong opponent, but its attacks were simple and predictable, which completely changed the situation. When the ogre threw another punch, Kang was ready. The warrior grabbed the creature's huge arm, using its own momentum against it. He spun his body with all his might and slammed the beast to the ground. And with the ogre still lying there, he seized the moment to land an extremely strong punch to its head. The protagonist even mocked that the enemy wouldn't need to pay for that dental appointment. Just one hit had been enough to leave the creature nearly toothless and dripping juice all over its face. But Kang didn't stop there. Full of adrenaline, he unleashed a flurry of punches, pounding the ogre like a maniac. The soldiers watched from a distance, absolutely stunned. They could hardly believe what they were seeing. The MC was taking down a monster using only his hands. Kang couldn't contain his happiness, celebrating that he had managed to defeat someone bigger and stronger than himself. The ogre was on the ground, looking like a smashed bunch of grapes. The creature cried as it began to dissolve into a blue light, which sparked a question in the protagonist's mind. Then it began to transform into a black orb, and the warrior wondered what kind of ability it would grant him this time. He was shocked to see something unexpected appear before his eyes. Then the soldiers thanked Kang for saving them, saying they owed him their lives, but the boy replied that he had only fought the way he wanted to. Changing the subject, one of the humans suggested that before the friends went to Nova, they should buy as many items as possible from the shop. The protagonist was surprised there was even a shop there, and the duo explained that they couldn't take anything to Nova unless it was bought from it. There was an old hippie-looking goblin sitting beside the shop, and he told them to take a look and choose whatever they wanted. The two friends were amazed, as it was the first time they had seen a talking goblin. Meanwhile, the soldiers said goodbye, heading toward the portal. Jita got excited, thinking about what they could do with so many coins. But to Kang, the fate of the money was obvious, and enthusiastically, he said, "Let's buy everything the goblin has in the shop." And so they did, grabbing great equipment for future battles. After finishing their shopping, a notification window suddenly appeared in front of them, glowing with the vibrant text. All conditions to go to Nova have been met. Then the portal to Nova opened in front of the friends, who stared at the intense purple light. Chinta cheered that they were finally getting out of there, and asked if his friend wasn't nervous about it. However, the musclehead's eyes shine as he says he's so excited he might explode. Already on the other planet, the little one asks the MC to look up to see the two moons in the sky. It was like Earth, but with a few little differences. They were standing at the edge of a cliff, and upon seeing sparkling lights below, Jinta suggests that's where everyone must be gathered, and they should follow them. But Kang cuts him off, saying the two of them had a problem, which confuses the nerd. Then his stomach growls, and the musclehead says, "I'm starving." It was like a disillusionment, since his friend remembered that he turned into a beast when hungry, and they still had a half-day walk to the tent village. A third presence interrupts their conversation, asking if the two of them had just arrived on the planet. It was a stunning woman wearing a blouse and skirt that were slightly torn. Jinta is impressed by her beauty and asks if she knows anywhere nearby where they could find food, since they had nothing on them. She thinks for a moment and comments that it didn't seem like they had nothing, since they were carrying two huge bags. The boy tries to play it off, nervously laughing and saying it wasn't anything important. She shrugs and tells them to follow her, since they needed to help each other in these dark apocalyptic times, and says she knows a place with good ingredients. Our boys go crazy over her and start following. When they reach the place, her attributes are practically bursting the buttons of her shirt as she points to the spot. The girl explains that she had found that fishing spot by accident. Jinty starts unpacking their things, saying he could make fishing rods with the store materials, and asks Kang to wait a little because he knew what he was doing. The girl then tells them to go ahead and make the rods while she goes to get the bait she had left nearby. While they're making the fishing rods, the boy tells the MC that he was worried, but happy they had found such a kind person along the way. However, the only thing Kang could think about was how insanely hungry he was, and his friend tried to calm him down, saying he was almost done. When he finishes, a little window appears in the sky, informing the little one that he had unlocked the crafting ability. He celebrates with his friend and says that now they just needed to wait for the bait to start fishing. But Kang couldn't wait anymore and jumped straight into the water, ready to catch some fish with his bare hands. Jinta scolds him, yelling that he shouldn't just jump into unknown water like that, and he sighs, saying he had no patience when his friend was hungry. Suddenly, someone appears behind the little one, asking why he was alone. Looking over his shoulder, it was the same girl from before, now surrounded by a group of imposing figures. They were all muscular and threatening. Their laughter echoed in the air, a chorus of mockery, because the fool had really fallen for the woman's tricks. One of the men announces the situation. "Welcome to Nova, kid, and if you keep wandering around lost like that, you're going to get robbed by guys like us." Jintae's irritation grows, and he responds that he had been tricked by the woman. He couldn't believe how shameless she was, flaunting her scams so openly. But she claims it was just the law of nature, and tells him to hand over everything he and Kang had, no tricks. Jintae says that if they mess with him, they'll seriously regret it. His courage makes a long-haired guy punch him in the face, saying he was trying to act tough. Then the guy asks his friends about a big guy who was supposed to be with him, and they all start laughing, commenting that he must have run away scared of the group, or maybe even hiding in the water. Suddenly, a huge splash comes from the lake, startling everyone. Kang emerges, fighting with two crocodiles that had jumped on him from under the surface. One of the men asks if he's actually being bitten by crocodiles, and the group watches in shock. As he fights the reptiles, a wave of adrenaline courses through the MC's body. He remembers the ability he inherited from the black ogre they encountered earlier. Apparently, the black orb had granted him one of the creature's special abilities. It was a remarkable gift that allowed him to endure the powerful jaws of the crocodiles without taking any damage. After all, he now had ogre's skin, which was tougher than pure steel. After finally subduing the two crocodiles, he drags their lifeless bodies to the lake shore. Upon noticing the group's presence, the boy asks who they were and explains that he had only prepared food for two people. Quickly, Jintae yells to his friend that he needs to be saved because those bastards had completely tricked him. Kang was starving and needed to eat that beast as fast as possible, so he asked his friend to explain things better. Whimpering, the little one summed it up by saying those guys were a problem and that he even got slapped. One of the members asked Kang, who looked like a fighter, what he planned to do now, and another tattooed guy also mocked him. He was confident because they outnumbered him there. However, the protagonist ended the nonsense with a single punch, and he warned the group to get ready because he didn't solve problems. The woman was shocked by the warrior's strength. With a look full of hatred and one of the crocodiles over his shoulders, Kang finished his sentence with, "I'd only eliminate them." After that, crocodile skewers were roasting while he asked if the group was Yeonyu's gang, the ones extorting Nova's newcomers. They all sat together, huddled like a bunch of little girls. The long-haired guy confirmed, and Kang noticed that he looked really young, wondering where the boy was from. Sitting on top of a crocodile, he asked if the kid was the team leader, but he smiled and shook his head, and said their boss was Jeon Yong-gu, the strongest in the region. The woman warned that the two friends were screwed since her boss was incredibly powerful thanks to the magic stones he had extorted. Kang took a generous bite of the crocodile meat, tearing it apart like a possessed man, and said their boss sounded like a real piece of work. The group watched, shocked, almost trembling. He was tearing through the meat with his teeth like it was the easiest thing in the world. It was even kind of gross to watch. The protagonist tossed a piece of the skewer in the direction of the troublemakers, who flinched in fear. Without losing his tough guy stance, Kang stood up and ordered them to take him to their boss, which left them confused. He wanted to see this boss in person, and from the look in his eyes, there was no room for refusal. At the faction's base, the warrior charged in, taking down two men easily with a single arm swing. His strength seemed nearly unstoppable, and the group knew they were screwed. But that was nothing to the MC, who realized the crocodile meat had only just started digesting. The other faction members gathered, murmuring among themselves about who that guy was, but all they knew was that he had come with the newcomers. The gossip spread, and everyone pointed fingers at the long-haired guy, Jong-do, accusing him of bringing the enemy to their base, and he thought they were screwed even if his boss managed to beat the MC. Out of patience, the musclehead shouted for Yong-gu, demanding they fight like gentlemen, calling him a coward and bastard. Suddenly, a hand adorned with a shining golden ring appeared, drawing everyone's attention, asking what all the racket was about. Jintae's life seemed to flash before his eyes when he saw the figure in front of him. The faction cheered at his appearance, for there stood their leader, who was even bigger than Childu. He looked around the scowl and asked in an intimidating voice, "Who dared mess with my boys?" Facing the old man head-on, Kang asked if he was the boss around here, but the man analyzed him and said he was just a rookie with nothing worth saying. But the protagonist wasn't intimidated and asked if being old was something to be proud of, commenting on the fact that he extorted newcomers. His words were cut short when suddenly the boss punched him in the face, and John Yong mocked the youth of today, advising him not to go saying whatever came to mind in that world. The boy agreed, and his tone frightened the boss. Kang grabbed the man's hand with a demonic glare and stated that the adult had the strongest fist in the place, John laughed at the situation and commented that it was quite interesting. And he even said he liked the warrior. Hoika expression took over his face as he proposed that if he lost to him, he'd give him the position of second in command. The protagonist quickly accepted the deal, but said that if he won, he'd take the group of newcomers. John Doe was outraged by the musclehead's boldness. Without further delay, Kang readied his fist and announced that he was going all in, and he landed a massive punch to the old man's belly. But it didn't affect him at all, and he said that starting without a warning was just dirty. Jinta watched in astonishment as he realized his friend's punch had been blocked so easily. But John Doe explained that his boss had swallowed 12 magic stones, so it was definitely possible. As the two fought, he explained that half of the stones were strength type, and at that point, his skin was like that of an ogre. John Yang knew it was true and tried to block the blows with his arms crossed. But the boy's face was terrifying and he was managing to hit him even with his abilities. While punching him non-stop, the warrior comments that it was the first time he fought someone so tough since the ogre, and says the old man was pretty strong. The man laughs while sliding across the floor, and he asks if it wasn't just because the MC was a brat, since his punches felt like tickles. But deep down, he felt humiliated. Preparing for a finishing punch, the boss curses him and wishes him the worst. But when their fists collide, a shockwave spreads through the room, and for the first time, the boss's confident expression wavers. He feels the protagonist's strength reverberate through his arm, until a notification window suddenly appears displaying the text, Giant's Hideout, indicating skin harder than steel. Smirking, Kang says the opponent should be happy if he managed to hit him. His arm was now green, which makes the old man wonder if it was actual ogre skin. The guy grabs the enemy by the neck and tells him to shut his mouth, because tonight's dish would be tongue. The crowd watches with their jaws dropped, stating that they too would fight for their boss. But the scoundrels from the lake step in front of the fight, explaining that it was a fair duel, and they would be opponents of anyone who disagreed. And one of Yangwoo's devotees calls them traitors even after swearing loyalty to the boss. But the long-haired one explains that he was loyal to the strongest. After all, he'd be labeled a traitor either way, so it was better to be with someone more powerful. Meanwhile, the old man flies through the air as his juices spill. The force of the blow shocks everyone there, realizing that their boss was done, for John Yang, once so imposing, was now begging for his life. But Kang had already decided it was time for him to sleep, finishing him off with one last punch. Everyone stares in shock as he laments, saying he thought he had finally met someone interesting. Instead, he saw a boss begging for his life, which was pathetic. After the fight, the MC had gathered all the good items from the faction, and now they could move on. However, someone calls for his attention. It was the old man, all beaten up, saying he had a question for the boy. He asks which organization he was part of, as he had never seen his face around those parts. The question leaves the warrior confused. What do you mean, organization? And he says he's a second-year student, which makes the swindler's jaws drop. After that, the gang thanks the boy for taking them in, to which he replies that they'll have to do better from now on. The protagonist knew that the fate of Barbarian was to grow through battles, and he finally had his first subordinates. However, despite the victory, he recognized that he was still weak. Remembering the moment he hesitated to strike John Yang. If his father had seen him then, he would definitely be disappointed. That thought triggered a new wave of rage inside him, regretting not having smashed his head in. He turns abruptly and calls for Jinte, but quickly corrects himself, calling him vice captain, and asks if the little one, who was still trying to process the news of his new position, had already given the instructions to the rookies. A smile of joy spreads across his face as he nods, saying he told them to set up the tents. And his friend says they needed to move on, but Jinte doesn't understand where they're going all of a sudden, and Kang explains that he had already decided their next destination. He asks if there was anything in the forest, and the protagonist replies that his instincts were burning. And smiling like a psychopath, he says that if they went beyond that point, they could become even stronger. The place they were looking at resembled a sharp Egyptian pyramid, and the MC says that was his new goal, a sanctuary within the pyramid. The next morning, the rookies were lined up while Kang praised their work in setting up the tents. He informs them that along with Jinte, he was going to cross the river. Therefore, the four of them should stay there to guard the tents. Jiangdu was proud that his new boss was planning to conquer another territory that had yet to be explored, and he asks when the duo would return. Kang shrugs, unconcerned, and replies, "I got no plans. Probably when we go back to Earth." And the long-haired one informs them that the next portal would open in 4 days. Since the portal opened there daily and 1 day on Earth equaled 5 in that world, that meant they would have a regular cycle for returning. Jin Tae felt relieved to know there was a guaranteed way out of that place. The idea of staying on that barbaric planet indefinitely was terrifying. The MC states that he would return in 3 days, thinking that the next time he entered that world, he would need to bring his grandfather along. Leaving him alone to suffer was not an option. Turning his attention to the boy, he says that the information the kid had just shared was very useful. So he asks what his name was, and Jiangdu introduces himself. However, pointing at him, the protagonist says that now he was number 1, which catches the boy off guard, exclaiming that he had a name. Next, he declared that he would call them the 5 brothers. numbering them from 1 to 5. This makes the woman freak out, asking if he was joking. She insisted that they all already had their own names. The answer leaves Kang extremely irritated, and he questions if that would be a problem. Intimidated, the girl backs off and says it was no big deal. Finally, the team wishes them a good trip. They finally reach the sea. They were on a wooden raft made by Jinte. He was getting really good at building things. However, the protagonist was frustrated with having to row all the time. He soon began pulling a rope, grumbling that he couldn't take it anymore. He seemed to be talking to himself while Jin-Ta watched him annoyed and asked what he thought he was doing. Jumping into the water, the MC replied that they were moving too slowly and he wanted to try another method. The boy was outraged at having his work dismissed by Kang's impatience. Next, he dove deep and began swimming like a maniac, propelling the raft quickly, almost like a boat engine. Jinta held onto the raft, concluding that this was definitely faster. The friend felt a wave of understanding as he watched Kang, who seemed to adapt to any situation with remarkable ease. He couldn't even try to compare himself to him, seeing himself as a loser. The fact that he had ascended to the position of vice commander only amplified those insecurities. But deep down, Jinta knew he needed to stop running from his problems and face them head-on. After some time, they finally reached their destination. Before them stood a huge pyramid-shaped structure. As they approached, a notification window appeared, stating that if they contributed to the activation of the sanctuary, they would receive special benefits. The nerd became curious, wondering if it was the first time he had seen a pop-up like that. Looks amazing just by looking at it, Kang commented casually, and he instructed him to grab the coins first. However, Jin-Ta remained still with a strange expression, gathering the courage to call out to his friend. When he did, he suggested that they should collect the coins separately this time, which made the protagonist question what he was talking about. Then the boy explained, "With this end-of-the-world crisis happening, I feel like I haven't done anything on my own yet." And he continued, explaining that this time he wanted to try going alone without the big guy's help. As the sun set, casting an orange glow over the landscape, Kang found himself in a fierce battle against a dinosaur similar to a velociraptor. With each punch, he felt a rush of adrenaline. He had never faced a monster like that before, and the thrill of the fight made his heart race. When he was about to land a finishing blow, he noticed a second monster advancing behind him. He shouted at the dinosaur in front of him, "How dare you ambush me?" And without hesitation, channeled his energy into a devastating strike, turning the creature into chicken. The area was full of coins and orbs at that moment, so Kang thought that should be enough. However, a pink aura shining from one of the dinosaurs caught his attention. A new notification appeared, informing him that it was a skill stone, granting magical power to throw items with more speed and strength. The warrior was excited to test his new ability, celebrating the fact that he had become stronger. Thinking about it, the boy wondered how his friend was faring against the monsters. Meanwhile, Jinta was alone, facing a huge dinosaur. He shouted at the creature, challenging it. Soon the dinosaur began running toward him, and the weakling ran, pulling the trap ropes he had prepared while praying that it would work. Fortunately, everything worked out and he skillfully trapped the monster. As soon as he realized he had the upper hand, he came out of hiding and with a powerful blow, struck the dinosaur's head. After the beast collapsed to the ground, Jin-tae fell beside it. He was exhausted from fighting just one. He looked at his weapon with pride, happy to have made a knife from the bones of the crocodiles his friend had hunted. He was filled with pride, thinking that he could hunt using his own crafting methods. However, his terrible peace was interrupted by the figure of a lumberjack orc that had suddenly appeared behind the boy. When it attacked Jin-tae, he managed to jump at the right moment to dodge. Still, he was definitely in trouble this time. It was a creature bigger than Childu, who was already a two-door Electrolux refrigerator. When the monster moved again to attack him, he was sure it was the end for him. However, before it could strike, the creature was hit in the face out of nowhere. It fell to the ground instantly from the impact. The boy was confused and asked what had happened as he looked around for whoever had saved him. It was Kang, proud of having protected his friend. A little window popped up, informing that it was the throwing ability, which allowed for a stronger and more powerful throw, and his partner kept celebrating. Later, while waiting for dinner to cook, the MC confessed that he was worried about the little guy, so he came to check on him. Jin-tae explained that he could handle the dinosaurs, but an orc was out of the question. Apparently, there was no helping him. He had lived a privileged life on Earth and never had to do anything alone. It couldn't be any different in Nova. Still, Kang encouraged him not to lose his spirit, and looking at his friend, he said that it was okay to be weak for now, and that if he kept trying, he could become a great warrior. The nerd was shocked by the comforting words and wondered if this was the same Childu he knew, because it seemed like he had matured a lot since they arrived there. Then the warrior added that, as he already knew, he was a barbarian, so he was very different from a regular human. Surprised by the comment, Jin-tae widened his eyes, incredulous and asking his friend to explain. But Kang was also surprised by the fact that the little guy didn't know anything about that. Calmly, he stated he was a barbarian from another planet, which left the nerd completely stunned. He broke the silence to ask if it was like the warrior race he'd seen in games. But thinking more about it, he realized that many of the things the MC didn't exactly align with what he considered typical human behavior. Kang asked if he really didn't know his true nature, and the boy freaked out, shouting that there was no way he could have known, which took the warrior by surprise. It was strange because the warrior was sure Jin-tae already knew, but he confessed he was more surprised that the buff guy found it weird. Trying to lighten the mood, he laughed and said now there was no need to compare himself to Kang, since they were very different. The next day, the friends celebrated their arrival at the Pyramid Sanctuary, and upon activating it, they were bombarded with rewards. Their inventory storage was activated and improved. While Jin-tae commented that the activation was amazing, like some kind of subspace, Kang analyzed that there was a difference in the reward based on the number of coins. While processing this information, a little window informed them that the duo had received the blessing of the sanctuary, which would double their recovery rate for 24 hours. That was enough for the nerd to say he already felt less tired and wondered if, with that kind of benefit, he could become stronger. It was time to stop relying on Shield-do for protection and start focusing on getting stronger. However, a series of unsettling noises pierced the air, catching both of their attention. It was a group of ogres, and the sight alone was enough for Jin-tae to forget all about self-improvement and cling to his friend like a damsel in distress. However, the MC pushed him away, saying that now he had his benefits and should fight by his side. The boy trembled and stuttered at the thought, but Kang smiled and told him not to be a coward now, especially because he had a barbarian at his side, and he declared that the little guy would take on the orc they had seen earlier while he handled the rest. Determined, Kang charged forward, eager to face the enemies. However, Jintae's face twisted in panic and he exclaimed that he thought the duo would fight together. By that moment, the warrior was already dodging the strikes of one of the orcs. He grabbed the opponent's spear and said that using a weapon against an unarmed opponent wasn't very manly of him. Then he used all his strength to lift the beast into the air, striking it with its own weapon. It was only fair since the enemy wanted to use armament. While celebrating his victory, another orc jumped at him, ready to attack, which made the warrior's veins bulge. At that moment, Jintae appeared, exclaiming that it was his opponent, which surprised Kang. Clenching his fists, he told the beast to fight him, calling it a primitive brute, and the scene made his big friend very happy and proud. However, the joy quickly faded when the monster swung his wooden weapon, smashing it against the nerd. The beast had relentless strength and didn't stop delivering blows. Crying in fear, he could swear he was about to meet his maker after that. Already dripping with sweat, the boy knelt as a green light surrounded him. He was using the sanctuary's blessing to recover. He sighed, relieved to have that ability at that moment. Now it was time to start over. Gathering his courage, Jinta ran toward the monstrous creature because he knew he couldn't give up on fighting just because he was afraid. He needed to be worthy of being friends with a barbarian, and that motivated him. However, he was quickly thrown by the beast with just one hit. Crashing into a tree, the boy acknowledged that he had let his guard down because of the blessing. Still, he was finally starting to recognize a pattern in the creature's attacks. Fueled by euphoria, the human charged at the orc, shouting that now it was his turn to attack. Meanwhile, he analyzed the movements, knowing the monster would start with a downward hammer swing. So he slipped under the wooden log, and that's what he did, dodging his enemy's critical attack while holding the crocodile bone knife in his hand. Jinta leaped upward, stabbing the skeleton blade into the monster's arm. He had now landed a critical strike on the opponent, which was enough to bring the beast down. Realizing his success, he celebrated like a child, and Kang congratulated him too. The MC said his friend had leveled up a bit, and he replied by saying he was beginning to understand how a fight worked. And he took the chance to add that the warrior was also amazing. After all, he had taken on the rest of the orcs with spears, which was no simple feat. The boy noticed a little window informing him that he had acquired a deep understanding of throwing techniques, unlocking spear mastery. Kang then explained to his partner that he had fought using a spear stolen from the orcs, which is why he had unlocked spear mastery. This surprised Jintae, and he realized it seemed to be the same concept as when he had activated the crafting skill, giving the idea that by using those weapons, they would learn. With his eyes shining, the MC asked if the little guy was fully recovered, and he was shocked that his friend was already looking for another fight. Kang then pointed to a patch of land in the forest, where a trail of footprints led to the orc camp, where he believed there were other weapons besides spears. After some time following the trail, a grumpy orc carrying a tree trunk on his shoulders was spotted by two soldiers. They observed the orc lumberjack village, commenting that it was their fault the army hadn't conquered that continent yet. Full of determination, one of them said that since they were the first to discover their base, they should at least be entitled to some kind of reward, and his companion agreed. However, before they could move on, Kang's huge hand grabbed one of them by the shoulders, startling them. The duo asked him to keep it down, and the boys recognized the muscular man. Laughing, Kang asked why they were wearing makeup, and the soldiers explained they were exploring enemy territory. And as he could see, if they got caught, it'd be hard to make it out alive. One of them said they should retreat quickly, because even for someone like the MC, it could be dangerous. Especially because of their boss, an orc that looked like a knight, wielding a massive weapon. The soldier explained that they would need at least a whole fleet of cadets to deal with that monstrous creature, but Kang was practically drooling at the sight of the weapon. Ignoring all the warnings, he grinned wickedly and declared, "I'm going to take that axe for myself." Then the two friends charged forward, leaving the soldiers in shock. One by one, the duo defeated all the monsters in the village. Now only the boss remained, who stared at the shirtless muscle man in front of him. Kang told Jinta to take a break because this fight would be his alone. But the boy was focused on the opponent's interactions, wondering if his friend had learned the orc language in the meantime. However, the warrior was merely repeating what the beasts always said to him. In response, the orc seemed enraged, shouting several random words at the man in front of him, and charged to attack Kang, who fortunately managed to dodge the blow. The warrior tried to hit the beast without success, realizing it would be difficult to fight with his bare hands because of the armor. Without warning, the beast lunged at the boy, swinging its massive axe toward him. The weapon grazed his skin. He knew that if it hit him, not even ogre-thick skin would survive it. With a psychotic look in his eyes, the warrior came up with an even better plan. And grabbing the monster's arm with hatred boiling in his veins, he said he would take its weapon. Using all his strength, the protagonist hurled the orc into the air, pulling the axe from its hands. Renewed with so much adrenaline, he channeled his power to crush the orc with the new weapon. A little window informed that the warrior had acquired the axe skill. From afar, one of the soldiers shouted that he was insane for attacking the village boss like that. Meanwhile, Jinta celebrated, saying it was expected of his friend to win the battle against the leader. But the guy with makeup was certain that Kang wasn't just an ordinary person, but more like a monster than anything else. He watched as the MC asked who the monster was now upon seeing his opponent defeated, and thought that a beast like that shouldn't be roaming free. At Army headquarters, Colonel Jang Myran Kong read the investigation report on Planet Nova, which said that Kang had faced the junior ogre in the first test. And it continued, confirming that after that, he had wiped out Yongu's gang and the orc hordes in Nova, and the soldier nodded. The one in question why someone like him hadn't been recruited earlier, to which the soldier suggested it was probably due to the MC's age, as he still wasn't old enough to enlist. With that, the colonel's expression hardened, and she flipped through the file, confirming his age, surprised to see he was just a high school senior. Closing the report, she decided, send him an early enlistment notice. But the subordinate warned that it wouldn't be easy, as the boy didn't seem like the type to follow orders. She leaned back in her chair, thoughtful, concluding that they have to find another way to keep the warrior with the military. However, a voice pulled her from her thoughts when it called from outside. Second Lieutenant reporting, Colonel. His presence made the lady smile, as he had arrived at the perfect moment and he was someone who could handle the job. So she asked him to come in. The comment prompted the soldier who had been there from the start to ask if she planned to send the defense personnel unit. The colonel, now serious, confirmed and said that everyone was facing a global apocalyptic crisis, and if Cho wouldn't come willingly, they would have to bring him by force. When Second Lieutenant Jun Won entered the room, saluting and asking if anything interesting was going on. Far from there, in the Cheonju disaster zone, the purple portal opened again, drawing everyone's attention. A group pointed at John Yongu, who was all bandaged up, commenting that the thugs had finally gotten what they deserved. A pair of friends agreed that they had always caused trouble and even stolen things from them. Besides him, our boys had also returned with a smile on their faces. Seeing the population's reaction, Jin Ta commented that his friends' actions were bearing fruit. Zhangdu remarked that the MC was practically the hero of Cheonju, something that made him say it felt really good to be back on Earth after so long away. They chatted among themselves until a soldier approached and asked which one of them was Childu. Second Lieutenant Choi Sung-na had an angelic face, quite different from what one expects from a soldier. She announced that she had a proposal from the army, and the protagonist asked what the proposal was, while the nerd quietly admired how attractive she was, keeping those thoughts to himself. The lieutenant began to explain that she had heard of his impressive deeds in Nova, and that's why she was there. However, the protagonist ignored her and called Jin Ta to leave, which made her very irritated. Refusing to accept that, Choi shouted for the warrior to wait, incredulous that she had been completely ignored. She added that she was there to offer him an official military rank, which made the little guy's eyes sparkle. But Kang said he wasn't interested. Furious, the lieutenant couldn't say anything, but an officer placed a hand on her shoulder to calm her and reminded her that they knew someone like the MC wouldn't give in easily. Then the soldier called the protagonist a high school brat, which caught his attention. And suddenly, he kicked him with all of his strength, but the protagonist blocked the blow with his forearm. Smiling, the officer asked if he was ready to talk now, and immediately attacked again with a kick to the stomach, knocking the warrior backward. The action made his friend shout. After taking another hit, Childu recognized Jung-hwan as a strong and fast opponent. Still smiling, he declared that the musclehead's antics wouldn't work here, as he was still just a small fry in Nova Seoul. The protagonist was confused by the mention of Nova Seoul, and the lieutenant warned him to accept the sacred duty of military service, adding that if he enlisted under his command, he would help him get stronger. Filled with rage, the MC concluded that all the powerhouses were in Nova. Seeing an opponent of this level, he acknowledged that he definitely would have lost if he hadn't gotten stronger over there. The silence made Jun-hwan ask if he was ready to enlist now, but the protagonist stood up and commented that the officer seemed to be someone important in Nova. He then declared that he would give it his all, veins bulging from his arms, but added a condition if he won the fight. And like a true furious barbarian, the protagonist attacked the lieutenant, shouting that he wouldn't enlist if it came to that. The enemy prepared himself, and with an ironic smile playing on his lips, he teased, "Come on then, cutie. Looking like a raging monster, Qianlu unleashed a flurry of powerful punches against the officer's defense, claiming he was kind of cute, actually. At first, the human managed to block the big guy's blows with confidence, but after several hits, he felt the bruises forming and pain surging through his arms. He wondered where that bastard had suddenly gotten so much strength from. Yet the protagonist, like a tireless madman, kept up his relentless assault. And with each blow, the opponent was pushed back more and more. Retreating, his arms worn out and exhausted, he wondered if that guy had really only been to Nova once, because it didn't seem possible. Observing the boy's stance, the officer saw no openings for a counterattack. Still, his pride wouldn't let him back down, so he tried to lunge again to land a punch on the giant. However, in an instant, the protagonist countered with a brutal knee strike, hitting Jun Huan in the face. The impact sent him flying back like a bomb, and the long-haired guy and Jin Tae watched in shock before bursting into celebration at the protagonist's crushing victory. The lieutenant rushed to the side of the defeated man as he writhed in pain. Cracking his knuckles, Xianlu commented that it had been a decent fight, but the officer could only groan in agony. Turning away, the protagonist assured them that they would meet again in Nova. The sub-lieutenant, still hiding his face, let out a low choking sound, wondering how the MC could be so strong and concerned. Choi asked if he was crying. Removing his hand from his face, the officer began to laugh and claimed that this act was becoming too embarrassing to maintain. As the lieutenant helped him walk, he laughed darkly. I need to remember the name Childu. At the protagonist's house, his grandfather studied him with a serious expression while asking. The old man looked at the massive axe from the orc chief, leaning against the wall, and commented, "Looking at this thing, it's hard not to believe you." The protagonist swallowed his food and insisted that his old man come with him to Nova, but he thanked him, happy that the MC had found his path, though he intended to stay there until the end. Even so, Chiolu insisted the old man should come, who then turned his cup before replying that adapting to a new place with so little time left would be very complicated. That left the boy in silence because he knew it was true. A wild and dangerous world like Nova would be overwhelming for his grandfather. Even the entry test alone would be too much. He was determined to return for him when he was stronger, so he said it was fine, but asked the old man to come with him another time. Before his grandfather could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears, and he asked if his grandson was expecting someone. With his mouth full of rice, the warrior mumbled that his friend had already arrived. He asked what Jin Tae had discovered about Nova, and the boy said all the information had been summarized as a national emergency. The government was blocking the media to avoid mass panic, which was a perfect scenario for those with information. His friend's conclusion left the nerd quite surprised. The little guy remembered what the sub-lieutenant had mentioned about Nova Seoul, and added that Cheonju wasn't the only place with portals to Nova. Apparently, they appeared in other regions too. The government and corporations that found out first had already started developing the new planet. Among them was the Paju portal, which led to Nova Seoul, an area controlled by the government. That portal had been open for 2 years. The protagonist's eyes widened and he exclaimed, 2 years? That's 10 years in Nova time. And his friend nodded, suggesting that powerful enemies already existed in that place. However, the initial activation rewards in new areas like Cheonju likely no longer existed, and he asked what his friend thought about all of it. He said staying in a new continent had been fun, but it would only make them fall behind. And he added the argument that if Nova Seoul was more advanced, they needed to go there to get better equipment, and Jin Tae actually thought he was pretty smart sometimes. Excited, the boy stood up, calling the little guy to head out, but he pushed back, saying they didn't even have a car. Smirking, Chiolu shrugged, saying there's always a way. Inside the car, Jong-do and the woman from his team commented that the trip was a good idea and they wanted to go, but needed to settle a few things with their old gang first. So Chiolu said they could meet up after that, but the woman asked if it was really okay, since the place was guarded by strong soldiers like Junwan. However, the protagonist revealed it wasn't a concern, because those who threatened them could simply be eliminated. The comment left her impressed by such power, while Jin Tae looked out the window, surprised they had already reached their destination. There was the Paju portal, also known as Nova Seoul. Looking at it up close, our boys wondered what kind of place it might be, but for the protagonist, it didn't matter. All he wanted was to become stronger. Crossing through the portal, Jin Tae marveled as he hadn't expected much from an area built 10 years ago. But he exclaimed that the place was already on the level of the Joseon dynasty, and the protagonist agreed it was insane. Suddenly, an old lady shouted for help, "Thief!" As Shinlu expected, there were punks there too. By pure bad luck, the culprit ran straight toward the protagonist, cursing him and yelling to move out of the way or face the consequences. But he grabbed the thief's face with his huge hand and slammed him to the ground, burying his head. Smiling like a lunatic, he declared he would dominate that place soon enough. The grateful woman gifted our boys a delicious meal. While Jinta praised the food, she said that if it weren't for the dew, she would have lost months of saved money. Xunlu smiled, grateful for the meal, and his friend commented on how nice civilization could be. But he began whining, remembering when they had to eat half-cooked crocodile meat. After finishing his soup, the boy was shocked by the number of bowls his partner had devoured in the meantime. The old lady smiled, telling him to eat as much as he wanted, because today, everything would be free. Modest, the warrior explained that they had only done what was natural, and asked her to speak with them if anyone bothered her again. He quickly went back to eating like he was starving. Meanwhile, the woman thanked them for their help, saying that even with soldiers in the village, there were still many looters. Curious, Jintae asked if that happened often, and she nodded, beginning to reveal the difficulties of Nova Soul since the population had exploded. Missions had decreased, and the strong now preyed on the weak, everyone for themselves. The protagonist smiled because that meant more prey for him. But the woman warned that it wasn't that simple, since you always had to stay alert and fight using the search skill. Upon hearing that last part, they asked what it was. Her expression grew heavy as she concluded that the two were unprepared rookies and said the search skill was essential. She explained that you obtained it by capturing a royal owl. It allowed you to assess your opponent's skills. Excited, Jintae exclaimed, "Perfect. We'll finally see how much we've grown." And the protagonist smiled, calling him to go hunting. The old lady asked if they were really going like that with nothing. She recommended that if they were going to hunt, they should gear up first. After putting on durable leather armor, they still needed more weapons. So they headed to the blacksmith shop the woman had recommended to get them. Arriving at the workshop, Jin said he had heard there was an amazing craftsman there and wondered what he might be like. Behind them, a rough-looking guy with a soju bottle in one hand and a hammer in the other asked what they wanted. The protagonist explained that they were looking for weapons. Jin covered his nose, bothered by the strong smell of alcohol from the man. The master craftsman said there was nothing there, and walking past them, told them to leave. The little one insisted and asked about custom orders, saying he had heard the man could make any type of weapon. Laughing, the man said they seemed like Mei people and explained that the blacksmiths of Nova Sul had closed their doors long ago. Xunlu asked why. And the old man explained that nowadays finding iron was harder than finding gold since the Obongsan iron mine had been taken over by bandits. Interested, the musclehead asked if they were looters too, and the man confirmed. But they were completely different. Nova Sul had three powerful figures known as the Three Grandsons, and one of them was Jang Hochiul-Hill, the bandit of Mount Obon. He explained that they weren't just thieves, but also hunters, and that guy was a special target, with accusations of murder and theft and a reward of 1 million. On top of that, they had as many henchmen as the army. If a war broke out, Nova Sul would suffer greatly. The protagonist then proposed that the man make him a weapon in exchange for Jang's head. The blacksmith stared at the axe in Qianlu's hand, shocked to realize it was the orc chief's axe, and asked where he had gotten it. But the MC told him to answer the question. So he continued, "Of course, if I can return to my forge, I'll make any weapon you want." He didn't believe they'd actually go after those bandits. With a confident smile, the protagonist told him to sober up because after eliminating the Obong Mountain bandits, he'd come back to order the best weapon he could make. They set off toward the mines in the forest. On the way, Jin asked why he needed another weapon when he already had an axe like that, and the MC replied that the more, the better. He explained that different prey required different fighting styles. It was all a matter of being prepared. The little guy nodded in understanding before raising another question. "But can we hunt around here? The place is packed with people everywhere." His head burned thinking that at this rate they wouldn't find anything, not even an owl. He regretted leaving his city, but the protagonist told him to wait. He picked up a stone from the ground and hurled it toward the forest using his throwing ability. A second later, a royal owl fell to the ground, struck with perfect accuracy. Jin stared in disbelief. "How did you know where it was?" And the musclehead said he had sensed the presence of something that wasn't just any animal. Excited, his friend encouraged him to grab the skill stone right away. The newly acquired ability allowed him to observe and analyze targets, extracting detailed information. The more he knew, the wider his observable range became. With that, he could now see his own information, and the nerd curiously observed the pop-up window. It read, Kang Chieldu, Barbarian. Traits: Barbarian's Heart, Fairy's Blessing, Ogre Skin. Abilities: Throwing, Search Techniques, Launch, and Axe. Seeing the fairy's blessing surprised him. A barbarian receiving a blessing from fairies, supposedly her enemies, was unheard of. It triggered memories of his past, but Jin interrupted, asking him to check his skills too. But there was nothing there. Two strangers watched as the MC suggested that maybe it was time for his friend to work harder on that. Hidden among the trees, Sergeant Kai Yang-su and Captain Choi Jun-siup were observing the duo's entire interaction. Paint dripped down the captain's face, the result of the stone the protagonist had thrown earlier. Noticing the wound, the surgeon asked if he was okay. The captain knew that if he hadn't changed angles, it could have been a fatal hit, and he wondered if Kang had noticed their presence there. Recognizing the situation, he declared, "We must recruit him at all costs." But his subordinate questioned if he was sure, given the direction the boys were heading. The man's face darkened as he noticed they were going to Mount Obong, which would be very bad. Meanwhile, Jin crouched down, scanning the area, asking if the warrior was sure this was bandit territory. Hidden in the bushes, one of the bandits mocked. "How bold of them, invading our land like this." Another clown approached, commenting that Kang seemed to have lots of valuable items, especially a huge axe. The group's leader grinned maliciously, thinking how foolish they were to offer themselves as prey so easily. It was Jang Hochul, who had the expression of a psychopath, and announced the start of the hunt. Our warriors continued their walk, spotting the mountain the blacksmith had mentioned, but had yet to encounter any bandits. Jin asked if his friend was sure about what they were doing, because he'd heard those guys were really strong. Unbothered, the protagonist smiled and said not to worry, because he would never lose to idiots. He'd just use his big axe. At that moment, he sensed movement near the duo, and with lightning-fast reflexes, he swung his axe, effortlessly cutting through the arrows fired at them. Jin ducked, shocked. They were the bandits, after all. Excited, Kang mocked them, saying they were making quite the ruckus for a welcome party. Using his keen perception, he detected figures hidden in the foggy valley, and shouted that it was a trap. The protagonist yelled, "Stay behind me," and the nerd obeyed immediately, shielding himself as the protagonist activated his ogre skin, his body hardening to a steel-like resistance. He endured the storm of arrows, fully protecting the little one. Terrified, he made sure his friend was okay. However, realizing the situation was more serious than expected, the warrior said he needed to get out of there. It wouldn't be easy to escape the forest, because the more they ran, the worse things would get. Seeing a stain on the musclehead's face, the nerd asked what had happened, guessing the arrows were poisoned. Scratching his own wound, the MC smiled and said, "Damn, I let my guard down. Not even ogre skin can block poison, huh?" Guy, frustrated, shouted, "You idiot," and you're laughing. But he ignores the comment and states that fight wasn't meant for Jin, asking him to step back. And Jin insists, asking if he will be okay. To which the protagonist replies that he should not be underestimated. He was a barbarian after all. Then the boy runs off seeking help, hoping his friend can hold the line. Meanwhile, the warrior, thirsty for battle, charges into the fight. Hours pass and night falls as more bandits lie scattered, but the poison spreads through Kang's body, dulling his senses. It was as if he could no longer control his body. Even so, through sheer willpower, he continues fighting, taking down enemies who are shocked by his resilience. Panting, he realizes he can't prolong the battle any further. So he pushes through the opponents to clear a path and escape as quickly as possible. His plan was working, and he was nearly at the foot of the mountain. However, he abruptly stops before a massive pit. Jang Hochul is there, laughing behind him while praising his prey's fighting abilities. He was truly surprised the young man had come this far alone. With the strong poison in his body, he questions whether that was really Jang Hochul, and realizes the opponent had lured him to that place. With a huge grin, the bandit declares that Kang was the kind of prey that made the hunt exciting. Hearing that makes the boy laugh, as he considered it a very cowardly way to start a battle, admitting he was disappointed. The gang leader is surprised by the musclehead's big mouth, but says the poison would paralyze him soon. Then he would become a walking corpse, eventually falling into the bottomless pit. His vision was already blurry when the clown says he could save him if he surrendered and joined the team. The protagonist grins wildly. If he were an honorable warrior, he'd risk his life, but he was a barbarian. With one last laugh, he says he wouldn't submit to cowards like him and throws himself into the pit. The action leaves everyone around stunned, asking if the guy was crazy or what. During the fall, Kang lifts a finger and tells the boss to screw himself, as he'd rather jump than die because of him. That really did seem to be the mountain the blacksmith had mentioned. However, immersed in darkness, his child self watches him, staring down the cliff and commenting on how there were no bandits in sight. It was as if he were facing himself, asking if he'd be okay, since the bandits were so strong. He assured that he'd never lose to men like that. It was just a matter of using the axe. But why was his inner self a child? Was it a sign his soul was stuck in that time? Spirits surround him, those connected to the fairy folk, a supposed curse upon barbarians. Since birth, those creatures had surrounded him. His secret, revealed long ago he was still an innocent child, led to his family's downfall. He apologizes to his mother, who assures him it wasn't the boy's fault and that those spirits were a part of him that should not be denied. He remembered clearly the image of his weeping mother handing him over and asking him to survive. Ever since, he rejected the spirits and himself. Tears fall from his face as he thinks that because his past was tied to those little creatures, his inner self had frozen in childhood. However, wiping them away, he pulls himself together. He needed to survive, because he was only still alive thanks to the sacrifice his family made. If this really was that place, maybe even his inner wounds could start to heal. In his adult form, a blue spark ran across his body as he focused his mind on controlling everything. Then, concentrating, he prepares for the pain, controlling his mind and body. The poison is expelled with great difficulty, causing him to scream. And as his body shifts from blue to red, Kang realizes he was finally responding. But not just that, he was becoming lighter, as if being free from chains. Several little windows announce that he was resisting the poison as the young man is propelled upward. The system emits a sound, informing that poison resistance had been acquired. Emerging from the water, he wonders if that was the power of visualization. He'd overcome a near-fatal crisis and felt he was closer to becoming a true barbarian warrior. He felt much more powerful. However, Now he worried about how to escape the hole. Noticing a breeze seeping through cracks in the rock, he decides to investigate. By moving a stone aside, a hidden entrance is revealed, leading to a staircase. Without hesitation, he follows it and discovers a secret dungeon full of hundreds of monsters, including a notably strong boss. Realizing what he had found, the MC grips his axe, preparing for battle, convinced that after every crisis, there was an opportunity. Meanwhile, Jinta is desperately running through the forest, fleeing from the bandits. One of them shouts for him to stop running, saying there's no way to escape from there. But the boy questions whether, if they were in his place, they would just stop running. Another thug sees an opportunity and attacks Jinta, immobilizing him instantly. Raising his blade, the bandit prepares to take the boy's life. However, before he can strike, an arrow pierces his skull, dropping him on the spot. It was Sergeant Kai Yong-soo and Captain Choi Jun-seop, who quickly ask if the kid is alright. Since he didn't know them, he asks who they are. But there's no time to talk. After all, they're still surrounded by more bandits. As the brutes advance toward them, the captain remains confident, telling everyone to focus on the fight. Back to the protagonist, he wipes the monster lipstick off his body. His irritation grows even after taking down hundreds of them. The creatures keep appearing. He finds it highly unusual, wondering if there's something else going on that he doesn't know about. From the shadows, he spots a different creature behaving strangely compared to the others. Kang knew the creatures had a trick up their sleeve. Instead of wasting time, he decides to ignore them and go straight for the true target. With a powerful leap, he soars over the horde, crushing those in his path until he reaches their leader, a shaman monster. From the beginning, the dungeon's mission was clear: defeat the shaman boss. With blood in his eyes, he recognizes the monster's presence. As he approaches, the creature casts fire magic at him. Reacting instantly, the protagonist activates Ogre Skin, shielding himself from the flames, and asks if playing with fire isn't too much for a first date. Using his throwing skill, the warrior hurls his massive axe. The shaman monster tries to block it with his staff and celebrates when he sees he succeeded. But he didn't count on the buff guy leaping toward him, saying he wasn't done yet. Then, with a devastating punch, the protagonist slams the creature to the ground, knocking it out. Quickly, he retrieves his axe, separating it from the monster's staff. With his feet on the opponent, he explains that in his tribe, it's tradition for a warrior to take the head of the chief if he wins in battle. Following tradition, he finishes off the boss without much effort, and laughs, stating that the cave was clean now. His system window explodes with notifications. He earned the boss emblem, a reward that allows him to form a tribe, claim territory, and build great bandit fortresses. Additionally, the guy receives the Guardian's staff as a reward for being the first to clear the dungeon. A world map also appears, surprising him. Holding it in his hand, a strange green energy spins in his palm, materializing into a map. However, it only shows places the protagonist had visited before, marked with exclamation points across a vast area. The sight of unexplored regions fills him with excitement. He wanted to explore all of it as soon as possible. His euphoria is interrupted by a red notification warning that the dungeon is closing and will soon be flooded with water. Wasting no time, he hurriedly gathers the coins and gems he earned to get out of there. Moments later, the warrior emerges from the water, still inside the hole. Looking around, he wonders how he'll get out, since the walls are so smooth that climbing isn't an option. From above, a voice echoes down to him. "Are you down there?" It's Jinta, who bursts into tears upon seeing his friend alive and tells him to wait. He'll throw down a rope to pull him out. The MC is happy to have such a loyal friend. Once safe, Guy notices the new tattoo on the protagonist and asks about it, but Kang casually says it looks really cool. Meanwhile, the soldiers discuss what to do next, and the captain says they have no choice but to follow Kang, as the orders were clear: observe and protect him. They whisper about trying to hide the fact that they're soldiers, since they know the MC isn't very fond of that kind of crowd. Excited, Jin introduces the Du as the ones who saved him from the bandits, and the barbarian seems grateful. They introduce themselves properly, explaining they met at university. The warrior then activates his ability to analyze them, observing out loud that they seem quite strong. This makes the soldiers suspicious, realizing he may have figured out their military. Feigning ignorance, the protagonist asks if they were also there to fight the bandits. The captain, hiding the truth, says that was the case, and quickly makes up a lie about holding a grudge against them, being pressed for more details. He and Sergeant Yang start sweating nervously, unprepared for that part. In desperation, Yang blurts out that the bandits destroyed his mother. The response makes the big guy emotional, and he embraces them as his brothers, thanking them for saving his friend. That brother title felt odd, since both of them are 30 years old. When they point this out, Kang lies and says he's 32, which leaves the Du shocked at his shamelessness. Ignoring their confusion, the protagonist confidently declares that he will personally ensure Jang Ho-cheol's head is placed on Yang's mother's memorial altar, and he mentally apologizes to his old lady who had nothing to do with the situation. The soldiers feel a mix of awkwardness and admiration. They already knew the guy was ambitious, but not to this level. One of them, farther back, hesitates and asks if Cheoldu had any strategy to proceed. However, when addressing the protagonist, he calls him Mr. Cheoldu. Instantly, the protagonist's expression darkens, terrifying the soldier, who quickly corrects himself, calling him Big Bro. His mood shifts immediately, and with a smile, he explains that first they'll need to search the area to find the bandits' hideout. Then they'll launch a full-scale assault on Jang Hochul. One of the soldiers, unconvinced, speaks up. In his mind, the protagonist was just an annoying teenager, but out loud, he says there's no need to search. Pointing to the east, he reveals that the bandit base is at the top of the mountain. This surprises Childu, who asks how he knows that, and the guy explains that he did proper research for revenge purposes. Accepting the flimsy excuse, the MC nods and says they'll head straight to the mountain's peak, and turns in the exact direction to proceed. On the way, the group runs into bandits, but all of them show remarkable skill, dispatching their enemies with ease. Despite being hit by several poison arrows, the protagonist keeps fighting, his body naturally resistant to toxins. Battle after battle, they continue advancing, and after securing a small victory, Jin celebrates and praises his friend's endurance. Impressed, Ka Yong-su calls over his captain and says Chivan-Lu is an idiot, but admits he's impressed by his sheer brute strength and determination. The commanding soldier wonders if, at this pace, they might actually be able to bring down Jang Hochul, which wouldn't be a bad thing at all. In that region, there are three main factions. To the southwest lies New Seoul, protected by the military. To the northeast, the Obongsan bandits reign, and farther north dwell the ruthless Desert Knights. The reason the military hasn't managed to tame the bandits isn't just Jang Hochul's group and their combat abilities. Any significant troop loss could leave New Seoul vulnerable to the Desert Knights. If the core of New Seoul's military force were heavily wounded, it would be a disaster as the area would be doomed. However, the soldiers wonder what might happen if Kang really pulled it off. Just as their faith begins to grow, the protagonist suddenly falls to his knees. Alarmed, they rush to his side, asking if he's alright. Then they notice his body radiating a strong reddish glow, and the warrior explains that he'd felt a bit dizzy since activating the status stone. The system had warned that his status wasn't increasing properly due to excessive absorption, but he chose to ignore it. Shocked, Ka Yong-su asks if he consumed too many at once, to which the barbarian replies that it was around 30. He starts lecturing him, saying that number is far beyond human limits and could even kill the guy. He considers retreating to the village for treatment, but that was no longer an option. They had reached enemy territory, and now hundreds of bandits stood before them. One of them recognizes the protagonist and screams in rage, asking if he wasn't the big guy who fell into the pit. Kang gets pissed, charging toward the guy, telling him to get out of the way, and shouts for Jang Hochul to show himself already. He wanted revenge, even if he was in no condition to fight at that moment. Moments later, Jang himself appears, demanding to know who dared to speak the Mountain King's name. The protagonist, exhausted, sighs heavily and mocks Mountain King. Who's that? Jang grins as he says, "You survived last time, but this is the end of the line." With a roar, he orders his men to attack, and the bandits prepare for battle. Meanwhile, Jang swings his massive flail at the protagonist, who blocks it with his giant axe. But the big bandit taunts him, asking how long he'll last with such a pathetic weapon. And the MC tells him to talk less and do more. Soon, the two warriors clash, trading fierce blows, Jang's flail against the protagonist's axe. Then Jang sees an opening. Taking the chance, he delivers a devastating blow to the protagonist's chest, launching him through the air. The force of the impact makes him crash into one of the bandit houses, reducing it to rubble. Groaning from the blow, the protagonist gets up, acknowledging the immense strength of the man. With his opponent's wide attack range, finding an opening was difficult. But the fight wasn't over, so it was time to change the plan and go simple. Clenching his weapon, he rises and returns to battle. As part of the strategy, the protagonist skillfully maneuvers his axe, trapping Jang's flail in it. And with a powerful twist, he disarms him, sending both weapons flying out of reach. Wearing a psychopathic grin, the warrior shouts that they would fight with fists only. Furious, the bandit questions what difference it would make to fight with or without weapons. Kang's eyes fill with rage as he declares that in hand-to-hand combat, the opponent wouldn't be able to defeat him. Activating his ogre skin ability, he smirks ironically, apologizing as he reveals he wasn't human. That made much more sense in the bearded man's mind, but his chatter gives Kang the opening to land a powerful punch. The warrior says he talked too much. With his hand over the spot he was hit, the villain complains about the bad manners of kids these days. Activating his own ogre skin ability, he smiles and finishes the sentence, saying they never listened to their elders carefully. That surprises the boy, who no longer looks so confident. Then the old man gives him a solid slap to the face, sending him flying far. This raises an alert in his friends, who realize the big guy is getting beat up. They agree they should grab Kang and escape, but they were surrounded by bandits. Frightened, the sergeant calls the captain's attention to the scene in front of them. Jang was grabbing Kang by the waist, squeezing him in a crushing hug. The brute force of the technique makes the protagonist scream in agony. The soldiers are completely stunned, and Jin Tae yells for his friend, almost getting hit by one of the thugs. But the captain protects him, tossing the weapon and the attacker away. Lying on the ground, the boy laughs, saying it was useless to do anything, and explains that this was the human juicer technique. Convinced, the bully claims that all four of them were doomed. Still squeezing with relentless force, Jang smiles and asks where Kang's strength was, bragging that he had hunted ogres before. He activates his second ogre ability, Ogre Power. His already massive strength increases to monstrous levels, capable of crushing boulders with ease, and he boasts loudly that he was Jang Hochiel, the embodiment of power. Despite his tense expression, Kang starts laughing, mocking as he asks if that's all his opponent had. The bearded man's face darkens, saying that apparently he could take much more, squeezing even harder. It seems the protagonist's body is about to split in half, but something doesn't feel right. His body seems ready to explode, so the protagonist releases all the overload energy through his mouth in a single blast. Everyone around stops to see what's happening. As the energy dissipates, he takes a deep breath and smiles in relief. A system window confirms his success in absorbing the status stone. But Jang complains about his lack of manners for burping in a situation like that, and says that if he still had that much air left to breathe, he was ready to make him faint this time so he wouldn't even think about breathing. However, the protagonist manages to slide his arm between Jang's, breaking the hold and forcing him to let go, asking who is pretending now. Seizing the moment, he grabs the enemy's arm and quickly applies a legendary arm lock, stating that something had been bothering him. How the hell had he gotten stronger? While holding the Master Buff Guy's arm, Kang teaches him a lesson. Strength isn't something you just throw around, it should support your weight on the opponent. And he finishes by saying that's the only way you burst with energy. The boy applies unreal pressure on Jang's arm, making him scream in pain. The man groans while the youngster brags about his accomplishment. On the other side, the village bandits are shocked to see their boss getting wrecked by a rookie. And Choi Jun-seop looks stunned at the possibility it might actually turn the tide like this. Jang, his face twisted in pain and rage, roars, "You damn bastard, you really dare to grab my arm." His fury explodes into pure killing intent. He grabs a weapon out of nowhere and attacks the protagonist with all his might, but the latter dodges effortlessly. The protagonist's expression is completely different as he sarcastically comments on the old man's new weapon. He was in total control, dodging the blows with ease. Not only had he grown stronger, but his reaction speed and peripheral vision had also increased. Seeing this, the soldier wonders if the young man had managed to digest the stone. And even if he had, how had he become that strong? The warrior disarms Jang before grabbing him by the neck. Even with overpowers, the bearded man couldn't do anything against Kang. It was his superhuman strength. Lifting him off the ground, the protagonist smiles and asks, "Didn't you call yourself the embodiment of power?" Jang, gasping for air, begs to be released. The boy lets him go and states that he's satisfied with his revenge. But before the other can celebrate, he says it's time for revenge on behalf of Yang's mother and all the citizens of Seoul and picks up the enemy's weapon. This makes the boss tremble with fear. And preparing for the final blow, the MC says he hates bullies like him, those who go after the weak, more than anything in the world. Then he finally sends the man to meet Jesus. Choi Jun-seop is in disbelief over Jang's defeat, and the bandits lose all will to fight. So kneel. Others beg for their lives. One of them points to the treasure backpack of the former boss, floating above the bearded man's body. Before they can reach it, Kang questions if they thought they were going to keep that, and everyone instantly denies it, afraid they'd have to pay with their lives if they challenge him. The young man says he won't punish them for something someone else did, and quickly takes the backpack for himself. This causes the bandit's body to disappear, leaving him confused, since Jang wasn't any kind of monster. Then one of the soldiers explains that he was a strength ranker, but the MC still doesn't understand. He continues, stating that rankers were classified as monsters. To become a ranker, one of your 5 skill stats had to exceed 50 points. Checking his own stats, Kang sighs, none of them had reached 50. The soldiers are even more shocked. The guy had defeated Jang even with the man's ogre powers, and one of them says abilities vary between people. But the warrior ends the conversation, calling the two to head back and have some tasty soup to rest. The captain agrees, but all he can think is, if he beat the bearded one without reaching his limit, he had already surpassed human boundaries. And that made him excited to see his future growth. The quartet arrives at the village, heading to the kind lady's restaurant to eat and check the bag, and the hero tells his friends to pick whatever they want. But Choi Jun-seop says they were the ones who should give him something, and Kang immediately asks what that something would be. The soldier thinks it's time to reveal his identity, so he confesses that both of them are soldiers from the Defense Command, explaining that they already knew who he was, and apologizes for deceiving them. However, what they didn't expect was that the protagonist already suspected they were military. Even Jin explains that it was obvious by the way they spoke, and Kang asks to call it even since they helped save the kid. Grumpy, the MC asks if they came to recruit him again, but they deny it, saying the mission was to follow and protect him until they could determine whether he was a friend or foe. Stokey asks what they determined, and the captain explains that he eliminated bandits, so he'd say they were friends, and even dares to say they're now allies of the army. The soldier asks Kang if he could show up at headquarters the next day as they give him a reward for Jang, and he nods, calling him little brother. Upon revealing their real ages, the protagonist finally acknowledges that they were much older. The next day at headquarters, an old man questions a young soldier about why the people's hero hadn't arrived yet, and he explains that Captain Park from the Special Forces went to receive him. With a grim expression, the old man repeats Captain Park, which frightens the young soldier, who corrects himself and says he meant Inspector Park. The old man loses his composure, laughing as he repeats the boy's words. Of course, Inspector Park. This was the general who was also named Park Jum-pil. Soon, the officer receives word that the protagonist has arrived and orders that he be brought in. Standing before Kang, he praises his extraordinary aura. They greet each other with a handshake, and as he explains his position in the army, the warrior asks if he was the tribe chief of New Seoul. This makes the old man blush, wondering if the big guy in front of him also enjoys playing RPGs. Shaking off the thought, the general thanks the protagonist for saving the people from Jang and remembering the promised reward, mentions that he has a proposal. Suspicious, the protagonist immediately says that if it's something about enlisting, he's out. But the man explains he has no intention of forcing him to enlist. Instead, he reveals his plan to establish a private military organization called the Mercenaries, and that Kang would receive unconditional support from the army. Jin argues that with their support, they could form their tribe much faster. It sounded like a good deal, since they wouldn't be as restricted by military regulations. Curious, he asks what kind of support they'd receive, and the general says the duo would have access to a base for operations, where they could make use of New Seoul's infrastructure, in addition to the ability to request jobs and even get free meals at restaurants. And the possibility of eating without paying is enough to make the boy's eyes sparkle. The old man continues, adding they'd be provided food and necessary combat tools, but the MC thinks the offer sounds too good to be true and asks what they want in return. With a calm expression, he replies that the task is simple. They need to eliminate his enemies, especially the armed bandits. The protagonist asks who those would be, and Jin confirms they're one of the three ruling powers. A mocking voice comes from behind the curtain, asking if they're already giving up before the battle even begins. It's a beautiful young woman with striking eyes who follows up by asking how two weaklings could possibly subdue the armed bandits. Tension rises as Kang glares at her with an angry expression. The girl asks where those two came from, trying to take her position so rudely like that. With a sly smile, Cheol-do introduces himself like he's the last cookie in the pack. Drawing her katana, she questions how someone so young dares to speak to her informally, and presses the blade to the protagonist's neck, saying he had no manners. Unbothered, the boy asks why he should respect someone who pointed a sword at him for no reason. Realizing she went too far, she puts her weapon away and, in an attempt to reassert her superiority, introduces herself as Major Lee Eun-young, 22 years old. The protagonist laughs, saying it's nice to meet her. The woman gets furious because she hates being spoken to so casually, but Kang provokes her, asking if they don't teach manners where she's from. Her fingers twitch toward the sword, and she snaps, "Are you going to keep provoking the best around here?" But the MC says she was the best until he returned. Their escalating conflict is interrupted when the general steps in, inviting Kang to try some snacks. Distracted by the food, he loses interest in the argument. Pulling Lee aside, the old man scolds her for her behavior, but she tries to justify it by saying the protagonist isn't trustworthy, and reminds him that she already said she'd take care of the bandits alone. However, her mentor insists she let go of that idea, explaining they couldn't handle the bandits by themselves. That makes her lower her head. Flashbacks flood Lee's mind, remembering when everyone celebrated her for defeating the leader of the mercenaries. Tears well up in her eyes as she questions him. She wants to know why the opponent held back right at the end, but the man in front of her only comments on how much she had grown. This makes her shout for him to stop saying nonsense and just answer the question, to which he replies that it was a final gift for his student, which she finds ridiculous. Provoking her, the man tells her to go ahead. Otherwise, New Seoul would never have this chance again. Even with her so close, he wasn't afraid. But the girl spares the man, who says she still had a soft heart, but she tells him to shut up and explains she'd never accept a victory handed to her by a traitor. And determined, she states that one day her army would punish the mercenaries. It was only a matter of time. The memory shakes her, her past failure weighing heavily on her, as she reaffirms she will capture the bandits and their leader alone because it's her duty. Seeing her hesitation, the general places a comforting hand on her shoulder and tells her to do whatever she wants, leaving her shocked. But he confirms it and says he has an idea. Back in the meeting, Kang asks if the old man wants the army and the mercenaries to join forces to defeat the armed bandits. And he nods, since they were a growing threat to New Seoul and had to be eliminated before becoming even more dangerous. But the cavalry made things complicated. The protagonist's eyes sparkle with excitement at the thought of keeping the horses if he defeats the bandits. That was enough to accept the mission. He remembered Kazuden, the best rider in the barbarian tribe, and also his father. It was someone Kang greatly admired. When he states that he'll cooperate, the general nods, ending the discussion, but Kang interrupts. There's still one little thing they need to settle. He stands before Lee, who watches him curiously. She asks if the big guy was thinking the same thing she was, and he nods, explaining that they needed to establish a clear hierarchy. The woman smiles and says that for the first time she liked what was coming out of the guy's mouth. Moments later, the four head to the training grounds at headquarters. Jin is worried about how the guy will fight, since his axe is still in the workshop. Calm, Kang says he'll fight with a sword, which makes the kid nervous as he had never used one. But Kang shrugs, saying weapon techniques are the same. He pulls Jang's backpack from his inventory, searching for a weapon he had seen there, while Jin freaks out, thinking Lee's sword was way too intimidating. However, pulling out a katana from the bag, the protagonist states that only amateurs blame their weapons for a loss, and he stares the woman down, convinced he's a master. The action stuns the general. He thinks the boy is crazy for wanting to fight with a sword against Jojin's best swordswoman. Trying to put an end to it, he asks if Lee really had to go through with it, especially with real swords, but she is determined to put the boy in his place. The protagonist smiles, enjoying the woman's competitive spirit, but the old man worries about losing two good warriors. He points his blade at the opponent, saying that out of respect for elders, he'll let her strike first. And the woman doesn't hesitate, rushing forward at immense speed while mocking Kang by calling him a child and saying she'll show him how to use a sword. Even though he's not used to the weapon, he instinctively blocks the strike with an effective move and smiles wickedly, saying it's his turn now. The warrior counterattacks, but she dodges effortlessly, appearing behind him and says slow attacks like that won't cut anything. They clash blades, which emit a bright light through the air. Kang realizes the enemy is very fast, faster than anyone he's ever fought before, so he knows he must stay alert. Lee praises the buff guy, saying he's blocking better than she expected. With a blue aura around her, she tells him to enjoy it a bit more. Then she infuses her blade with condensed mana, which surprises the boy. He tries to block her blows, but before he knows it, she's using her maximum acceleration toward him. From the sidelines, the general cheers on his swordswoman, while the MC struggles to defend against such a strong and fast opponent. And he realizes that at this pace, he's going to lose the battle. However, his system window appears, informing him that his understanding of swordplay has deepened, activating the Swordmaster skill. A confident smile spreads across his face and he asks, "Are you ready for a real fight?" Switching from defense to offense, he matches her strikes, overwhelming her with his new skill. The woman is confused by the speed the MC suddenly gained. It didn't make sense. Just minutes ago, the boy couldn't even block her attacks. In an instant, Kang vanishes from her sight, but before she can react, he reappears at her side. He seemed to specialize in perception and agility. With a single strike, he sends her flying back, boasting that he wins in both speed and power. Still, Lee regains her composure, furious. Biting her lip, she yells that if he wants to deal with strength and speed, then she'll aim for his blind spot. But the warrior uses his dynamic vision to spot the woman, mocking that in the field of vision too, he wins. He blocks the strike, sending the girl flying far. She's stunned by that, wondering what Kang really is. When she gets distracted, the protagonist tells her she's losing focus again, placing his blade at Lee's neck. Pointing the blade at the woman in front of him with a triumphant smile, he declares, "I'm superior to you in every way." It was an undisputed victory. Back at the base, now officially sponsored by the army, the protagonist examines his new headquarters with satisfaction. A soldier whispers to Lee, reminding her to address the guy as Brother Chief Chieldu, and she asks why he calls him brother, but he changes the subject. She sighs and asks what Kang will do with the bandits from the previous battle, who are all piled up nearby, but he says he'd already thought of that. An hour earlier, the boy insisted that Lee call him Big Bro, but she said she'd rather exile herself from the land than do that. Meanwhile, the general was in shock. The best swordswoman in Jojin had been completely defeated. If her subordinates had witnessed that scene, it would have been devastating for their army, but the soldiers were celebrating the victory of their big bro. Hearing that, the old man turned very stressed, asking whose side those two were on. When the rest of the captured bandits were brought in, the general noted that there were too many to imprison. The protagonist then proposes that they sacrifice the worst ones and send the rest back to the land, which scares the old man. Pointing to some of the prisoners, he asks if he could take them as he needed some mercenaries, which was something new around there. The general says he would be grateful if he took them, as they were overwhelmed with so many people, but questions if Kang really wanted criminals in his group, and he nods. He steps in front of the prisoners, asking if they remember him, and says he was giving them a chance to survive, they just needed to face him. With a demonic face, the warrior states that those who survived could have a new beginning, no matter how many they were. However, one of them asks if trying to fight Kang wasn't the same as going straight to the grave, but another was willing to try, since it would be the same in the end. Realizing they had no chance individually, the bandits decided to attack all at once, relying on their large number. However, as everyone had already predicted, their fate was obvious. Even so, the protagonist acknowledged the group's courage in facing him. Kang asks if he could really take the survivors to join his group, and the general nods, saying they would keep only the cowards who didn't fight. Despite that, the protagonist smiled, thanking for his new workforce. With a casually yet confident gesture, he raised his fist for a bump with the old man, which shocks him, not used to such familiarity. But he returns the gesture, laughing as he proposes a friendship with his new neighbor. As they say goodbye, the warrior refers to the old man by his name, which leaves the soldiers, Lee and Junpil, speechless. The woman especially shows discomfort with this casual treatment, but the general himself doesn't seem to mind, happy with the gesture. Back to the present, the protagonist explains that his original idea was to turn the bandits into a warrior tribe. Lee immediately questions him, reminding that those men were criminals, and Jin agrees, explaining that mercenaries were trustworthy people, which wasn't the case here. The protagonist, unbothered, asks if his friend had forgotten about the old brothers, who were also bandits, and yet they trusted them. And he further argues that trust is naturally built through battle, which throws the boy off, not knowing how he would do that. But Kang pats his shoulder, saying he'd find a way, since he was the vice captain. In front of his new recruits, the protagonist raised his voice to say that their past crimes no longer mattered, because they were his mercenaries now. When he asks if anyone had a problem with that, the ex-bandits shout in unison that they did not. A soldier observes how incredible it was that his friend had managed to unite all those people together. Meanwhile, Lee was sure that this was exactly why someone like Kang in power was dangerous, so she would keep a close watch to report everything that happened. A week later, the protagonist was officially reported as a potential threat to the government, and the general finds the allegation outrageous, asking who had reported it. But his informant reveals that Colonel Jan Myran from the military barracks had filed a report, saying she had already tried to recruit the boy. Holding the paper, the old man gets irritated, unable to believe that the woman had lost her mind just because she couldn't control Kang, something he had already predicted. The boy asks him to stay calm and try to persuade the government quickly, and the general agrees, as it would be a problem if the government tried to control the mercenaries. At that moment, a group of soldiers arrived, reporting that they had urgent news about the formed tribe. Handing the scroll to his superior, the old man prayed that the bandits hadn't done anything wrong in the meantime. The report shows Kang had been accused since the first day of exploiting the bandits' labor to build huts throughout the night. Then he forced them into combat training that consisted of one-on-one fights with him, where he stated that the training would be doubled if they didn't attack. And he also punished those who tried to run from the aggressive training, saying that if they had the energy to flee, they had energy to fight harder. After subjugation, he told everyone to rest while he went to the railway to retrieve their weapons, as his axe had finally been repaired. Then a small window asked if he wanted to use the tribal chief emblem, which would allow him to establish a tribe within a territory and name it. Confident he had shaped his soldiers enough, the protagonist accepts, and without hesitation, he names them the Hardhead tribe. Instantly, the system confirms the creation of his new tribe, capable of housing up to 200 members. His friends congratulate him for forming the tribe he had long wished for, and he smiles victoriously, stating that this was just the first step toward having his group of warriors. Back in the general's office, the report detailing these developments left him stunned by how quickly the emblem was obtained. The captain explains that he had earned the reward after clearing a hidden dungeon full of monsters. The old man remained impressed with the boy's reward. He reassures him that by having created the group with the emblem, they were safe, and his subordinate nods, explaining that they would be bound by magic. So if one of the bandits tried to escape, they would still appear on the map of the mercenary captain, which was enough to keep the government at ease. Reading the name of the group, Hardhead Mercenary Corps, the general smiles, eager to see the results of the first mission. At nightfall, the new group sets up camp to spend the night. Inside her tent, Lee wondered if, this time, she would be able to defeat the leader of the horse bandits. But she didn't even know if victory was what she truly wanted. Kang approaches the girl, asking why she wasn't eating, and she explains that she wasn't hungry. Serving himself, he says the woman should eat properly to fight properly, which confuses her. Was he trying to take care of her or what? Lee blushes, as no one had taken care of her since she became the best swordswoman in Jojin, so that gesture was very kind. It reminded her of her mother, which didn't seem to be a good memory. Drinking the soup, he comments that it was a bit disappointing not to have rice to go with it, which leaves the woman outraged since the boy was stealing her food. Lee yells that there was very little rice in New Seoul, telling him to shut up and eat his meal already. Suddenly, Kang stands up, looking around as if searching for something. The girl asks what had happened, and he questions if she couldn't hear that sound, but the woman had no idea what he was talking about. Summoning his massive axe, the warrior explains that it was the sound of the hooves of the horse bandit steeds. Nearby, the bandits were looking at a horde of crocodile-like monsters, commenting that they would have plenty of prey that day, and the leader commands them to wipe them all out, as always motivating them with the claim that their opponents could never match the group's speed. Shouting, Kim Chun-ba, their leader, commands the men to show the power they had together. Then the monsters and the bandits engage in hand-to-hand combat. Immediately, Chun-ba asks if their leader was there, and as soon as the creature presents itself, he provokes it, telling it to try dodging his spear with such a floppy body. As if it were nothing, the blade pierces the creature, which screams from the blow. But the man already knew he would come out victorious from that fight. In the end, he orders his subordinates to collect the loser's belongings before regrouping. From the top of the cliff, Kang calls out to the boy, who is surprised by his presence. With his usual confidence, the warrior explains that he was there to finish off the horse bandits and, of course, take his head. The giant jumps off the cliff to stand face to face with the man, who asks who he was, and our boy introduces himself, stating he would exterminate him and take his horses, which were quite impressive. Chunba says he had heard the rumors about the buff guy who had wiped out the mountain bandits, but questions why someone with such potential had joined the military. The comment makes him laugh as he didn't follow any army orders. And in advancing with his axe in attack position, he exclaims that he had only come there to punish the looters. Blocking the blow, the enemy group's leader asks what he meant by looters, as they had never stolen anything from others. And he adds that the horse bandits were merely simple explorers. The man tries to hit Kang's shoulder, unsuccessfully, but the warrior asks what he meant by explorers, saying he had received very different information, yet still didn't believe what the long-haired man was saying. Meanwhile, he was shocked that the protagonist had moved an inch. It was incredible strength, on a much higher level than his own. He knew that, if they kept fighting like that, his entire group would be in danger. Brave Chunba declares that if the MC still didn't believe him, he would give his life to prove he was telling the truth. However, he would be killing someone innocent. Provoking him, the man presses to know what our boy would do. This leaves Kang very confused, because what if he really was innocent? He remembers how it had been with Jang. Even though he was a criminal, he still felt guilty. But what if the man standing in front of him was telling the truth? He needed to confirm that before doing anything. Suddenly, Lee and Jin appear with the mercenaries. The woman was yelling, asking what Kang was thinking by going out alone like that, and his friend was asking if he was okay. Preparing to draw her katana, she celebrates that at least the musclehead had caught the traitor they were looking for. He didn't know why Chunba was a traitor and asks her to wait before doing anything as he needed to confirm something, which raises an alert in the girl. Kang explains that according to the man, his group wasn't made up of looters, so he asks her to tell the truth if she's hiding anything. Lee reveals that, in fact, the horse bandits weren't looters, but they were definitely dangerous individuals. The information leaves the MC intrigued, but the girl insists that Kim Chunba was a traitor to the army. The bandits were like them, but were always in conflict with Director Park about the future of New Seoul, eager to explore everything with no safety in place. Eventually, the gang leader left the army and formed his own organization, which stressed the general out as one of his own was opposing the military. Upon creating the enemy organization, the long-haired man remained there, and ever since, they have been the government's top extermination target. Trying to understand, Kang asks if they were dangerous but not looters. And Lee explains that despite the rumors, there was nothing official mentioning any damage caused by the bandits, but the leader knew too much about the army. He was dangerous. Hearing all that, Chunba calls out to her, stating that they had never used military information and never attacked New Seoul. He asked her not to ignore the truth. She is left speechless by that, and the protagonist realizes how unexpected the situation really was. After all, the man was far too calm for someone in that context. Returning to the point, he asks if Kang was going to take his head as a gift or not, and he requests that if his death proved the group's innocence, their lives be spared. That shocks the MC. The guy was offering himself to save his subordinates. Surprising everyone, the warrior determines that the extermination of the horse bandits would be under review for a while. Lee scolds the boy upon hearing that, but he says they weren't bandits, and if they killed them anyway, they'd be no different from Jang Ho-cheol. And he adds that they wouldn't leave empty-handed, so he asks where they got their horses from, as that information could save the bandits' lives, which makes the woman even more stressed. While she complains loudly, Chunba praises the boy for knowing exactly how to get what he wanted. He gives in, stating that he'll tell him how to get horses, but asks him to pay close attention, as it was a special method. Unlike the horses on Earth, the horses of Nova were not easily tamed. There was only one way. You had to craft a pet pouch to bond with them, an item that stored and maintained living creatures on that planet. Extending a red fortune root, the man says that was the first ingredient needed to make the pouch. Excited, Kang asks how to get it, and the long-haired man explains that it wouldn't be easy. Moments later, the warrior goes to the ogre basin, where he finds a giant ogre, unlike any he had seen before. But he smiles and begins advancing toward his prey, celebrating that he had gone there alone. He figured it would be faster if everyone went somewhere different, as there were many ingredients. Besides, fighting strong monsters was his job. The barbarian charges with his axe, but the creature quickly blocks him. They engage in an intense fight, and Kang smiles at the balance of power between the two. The ogre throws him far, but he manages to stop himself with his axe. The protagonist promptly activates Ogre's skin, knowing that if he had taken that hit directly, it would have been very dangerous. He wonders if Jang and Chunba had really defeated one of those with their subordinates, knowing it must have been tough. The creature keeps trying to strike him, and it's very hard to find an opening to attack, thinking it could finish him with just a single slap. But he feels like this is the perfect situation for a test. So when the monster tries to slam him, he channels a red aura into his axe before blocking the opponent's weapon, which makes the ogre stumble backward. His eyes shine intensely upon seeing that things had gone better than he expected. Flashbacks from the day he went to Yongho's forge a day before the extermination. He explained to Kang that he had used some materials he received from a gnome, and they were pretty unique. The protagonist is surprised, asking if that gave the weapon any special ability, which the blacksmith confirms, saying the axe was now infused with magical energy. If he could learn to control it properly, it would be useful to boost his dodging ability. Back to the fight, the ogre seemed even angrier, Now the warrior had mastered the technique of defending against an opponent's attack and redirecting it. And with the magic of his weapon, the creature's movements were completely disrupted. Then he could use the rotational force generated by the deflection to increase his power. His movements were so fast that the creature only realized it when Kang was already in its face. Thus, he sliced the veggie in half, and even its steel-like skin couldn't stop the warrior. He proudly looks at his masterpiece, thanking it for such an interesting battle. A purple light emanates from the fallen opponent, catching the protagonist's attention. His little window informs him that he had gained an ogre ability, allowing him to acquire one of the ogre's special skills. The boy smiles like a psychopath as he presses the orb that would boost his power through the ogre's strength, which he now possessed. Meanwhile, Jin and some of the bandits arrive at the Mimic Cave, where they had materials to synthesize the pet pouches. One of them asks if they should open all the chests, giving a cheeky wink. It was very hard for the nerd to get used to the way they talked. He explains that not all the chests contained magic pouches. Actually, 9 out of 10 had monsters called mimics. Among themselves, the mercenaries playfully mimic the monsters, showing no sign of fear. The small one hangs his head, thinking someone braver than him should have come instead. When he, Lee, and Kang split up the tasks, it had been a very tense moment. Awkwardly, he asked if the woman was the one going into the cave, but she didn't seem comfortable with the idea. Proudly, she states that since the mission had been cancelled, the army had no reason to help them, so she would return to the village and write the day's report. Even nervous about going to the cave, his friend encourages him as always, saying it would all be fine. After all, he was the captain, and adds that if he led them well, it would be no big deal. He snaps back from his thoughts, trying to focus on the fact that his partner had given him that important mission, and he couldn't disappoint him. Bravely, he begins explaining the plan to the subordinates. The frontline warriors would identify the treasure chests and the mimics, while the archers were to take care of the monsters when necessary. More confident, Jin tells them to begin. Far from there, the mounted bandits set up their tents to wait for the hardhead mercenaries. From above the camp, Chun-Ba is questioned about giving out the horse information, as their lives would be in danger if the army learned the method too. But he says that if that were the case, they have to find another way to grow stronger, because horses shouldn't be monopolized. The group had just learned it before others. His subordinate agrees, adding that the materials were hard to obtain, but Chun-Ba asks if he really thought so, and explains that, in his opinion, Kang would get everything without much trouble. As night falls, the bandits turn to face Kang's group returning. The long-haired man is surprised by the warriors' speed and asks if they had found everything, to which he replies yes, since they had split up to collect the items. Jin extends the pouches they obtained, which impresses the man. He asks how many roots they got, and Kang displays the countless ones he had gathered. Smirking mischievously, he asks if that was enough. Earlier, while finishing off the ogre, he had been impressed to see the roots in person, commenting to the defeated opponent that it seemed easy to get. And upon spotting other ogres nearby, he figured it'd be best to grab as many as possible. After all, he had traveled a long way for it. Chun-Ba asks what Kang's secret was to get all that with half a troop, but the boy says he has no secret. He just took out the ogres and collected what he needed. The fact that he fought alone leaves the man even more shocked. Showing off, the protagonist claims that if there was a secret, it was his own existence. Moments later, they head to the pouch-creating lab. There was an abandoned alchemy lab, and the MC is surprised to see that only the bandits knew about it. And Chun-Ba explains that in Nova, information was power. He adds that those who chose to explore the place were the first to discover it, but Kang could go ahead and try making his own pouch. Upon placing the materials there, a little window asks if he wants to synthesize them, which he does. A cloud of smoke covers everything around when the item is ready, and Kang smiles as he sees the object in his hand. The boy tells Jin to hurry and synthesize the rest, as they needed to go after horses as soon as the sun came up. After finishing the work, the friends were having dinner with Chun-Ba, who commented that he would make them a drink if he could, but the boy says they were underage. The information surprises the man, but the nerd ignores it and asks why the long-haired one decided to leave the army. He stays silent for a moment and explains that they had different approaches, as the current director was focused on peace and prosperity, while he believed it was necessary to explore and strengthen New Seoul. Since they couldn't align, he preferred to leave once and for all. Curious, Jin asks if he didn't regret it, and if he still had any affection for the military. However, the man says his thoughts hadn't changed. He was protecting his nation in his own way. But the boy doesn't understand what he meant by protecting. To Chun-Ba, if New Seoul focused on developing civilization, it focused on controlling external threats. Otherwise, it would have already fallen into the hands of bandits. Jin keeps questioning him, since he was the one who created the balance between the army, the bandits, and the horse bandits, which the man agrees with. Gnawing on some chicken, the protagonist asks if he didn't feel guilty about the fact that his former brothers were chasing after them relentlessly. But he knew that one day everyone would understand. This was just the first step. Kang admired him for being such a wise guy. Saying goodbye to the Do, he tells them they have a long journey the next day and therefore needed to rest. As he leaves the tent, someone catches his attention. It was Lee, which confuses him, since she had said she would return to New Seoul to write a report. She says she came back to ask something. Then she questions why he let her win when they fought, to which Chun-ba replies that if she got hurt, it would weaken the army's entire strength. However, the woman isn't convinced and tells him to stop making excuses. The man stays calm, explaining that New Seoul needed a symbol of power, someone untouchable, and she yells that he could have stayed in the army too. He smiles, saying he had his own duties, and scolds her for showing weakness. It was like going back to when she was just a major, but the man reminds her that now she was the best swordswoman of Joseon, who protected the citizens of New Seoul. The next day, the two groups head toward the natural habitat of the horses. Looking from above, Kang asks if those were the only ones, and Chun-ba confirms, but assures him they were stronger than he thought. He explains that if you fed and treated them well, the affection between you would increase, making magical energy flow, and then you could adopt them as pets. Jin finally understands that the route was also to feed them, so it was good they had so many available. He stops talking when he notices his friend didn't look well. The warrior had a huge scowl and explains that no matter how he looked at those horses, they all just looked like regular horses. However, something catches his attention right as he finishes his sentence. It was a huge muscular horse called the Steel Zebra, and it was the king of the plains. Jin asks who that was, as it was way bigger than the other beasts, and Chun-ba laughs but says it was an untamable monster. The idea of such a challenge excites Kang. It was decided that was the one he wanted as his horse. Chun-ba gets worried and warns him that it wasn't a horse. It was a completely untamable monster. But the warrior ignores him, running toward the beast and yelling that in his dictionary, the word impossible didn't exist. The monster stared at him with a mocking expression. It was clear it liked to fight, which only excited the protagonist even more. Pointing at it, Kang commands it to become his pet. However, the creature neighs with rage before charging toward the musclehead. It seemed to really dislike him, so since it didn't seem very willing to obey, the MC goes for another approach, striking the horse with all his strength. When he sees the opportunity, he grabs the creature's horns and mounts its back. Despite the creature resisting, the barbarian was having fun, commenting on how strong it was and asking if this was some kind of test to see if he was worthy as an owner. And he pounds the beast's head mercilessly, for he would never lose in a contest of strength. By this point, the horse already had a huge bump on its head, so Kang repeats the order, "Surrender and become my pet unless you want another one of those." Out of strength, it gives in and is promptly registered as his personal property in the system. Meanwhile, Jin was petting a beautiful little horse, and his friend asks if that was the one he wanted, which the boy confirms, saying it was really cheap. Kang turns his attention back to his new little buddy, wondering what name he should give that monster. He decides to name it Sonata and even suggests that Jin name his horse Avanti, both famous car models in Korea. At the end of the day, the group was returning from the plains. Chun-ba confesses he had never thought of taming beasts that way, which meant it was possible to tame strong beasts, not just horses. He turns to Kang, complimenting him by saying he was always surprising, and the boy thanks him for showing them how to make the pet pouch. Now that everyone had gotten what they wanted, it was time to go their separate ways. And the MC asks where he thinks the bandits will go now. The man reveals that their goal was to cross a border that was there, and the MC asks if the covered map was blocked. His friend nods but says if the area was like a game, there had to be a way to make the barrier disappear. It made sense, and he asks if they already had a plan. Chun-ba says he suspected they'd have to hunt the area boss, but didn't yet know where. Kang says there was one over there too, asking if it was okay to exchange just that information, since his group could arrive first. But the man laughs, saying he wasn't someone greedy like that. He was an explorer and therefore only wished for peace for his land. As always, he was very resolute, which was rare to find. Finally, Chun-ba says goodbye, but before he leaves, Kang asks if he could consider becoming a comrade of the mercenaries. However, he refuses the proposal, as he had too many people to care for. The partner understands, but still leaves the possibility open for him to change his mind. Kang watches the group leave and soon calls his tribe to return to the village in New Seoul. Upon arriving at General Park's barracks, the old man questions what the young man was thinking by canceling the mission to eliminate the horse bandits. However, he explains there was no reason to go through with it, and that he wasn't an assassin, something the old man says isn't a decision one can make for themselves. Furious, the MC claims he can make his own judgments, and asks if, even as a soldier, he would kill a child if ordered to. The old man couldn't believe he was trying to compare a little child and Kim Chun-ba on the same level, but he argues that the man was just an adventurer, so in terms of innocence, he was the same as a child. There was a lot of insistence from someone who knew him. Defeated, Park says he was a good person and confesses that he himself had hesitated. He only wanted to ease the pressure from the higher-ups to eliminate him. Kang appreciates his honesty, and the old man vents, saying he had been a coward for trying to relieve his guilt by passing the mission on to the warrior. Then MC laughs, understanding the hesitation in taking out someone so decent, and even he had wanted to recruit him, but the guy refused the proposal. Affectionately, the old man acknowledges that Chun-ba was someone dear, but had a rebellious side that could only be controlled by someone very special. That statement makes the boy wonder if he'd been rejected because he didn't seem like an attractive enough leader. Changing the subject, Park asks if the boy wasn't hungry, and he gets excited, thinking he was offering soup. But he already knew soup wouldn't be enough to fill the musclehead's belly. Then several servants open the door, bringing a variety of dishes, a real banquet to celebrate the friend's return. The old man offers a drink to Jin, who immediately says they were both underage, so it wasn't going to happen. But he figured the pair knew that a year had already passed on Earth, so they were adults now, and the information leaves both of them shocked, but Park serves them anyway. Before he can raise his glass, Kang says he couldn't learn to drink with a friend. You'd have to go to his grandfather first. Then with a bowl of rice in hand, the boy says it's time to eat. Days later, Jin and Kang were riding through the middle of nowhere when the small one asks if it was okay to leave the mercenaries alone, but his friend wasn't worried. Even if they couldn't flee out of fear of punishment, he thought it'd be good for them to be controlled or trained by someone, and the MC says he'd think about it. The duo is welcomed by General Park, and he is impressed by the horse the warrior had tamed, and Kang promptly introduces Sonata and Avant formally. The old man scolds them for the names, arguing they should have chosen grander names for the beasts. But he quickly changes the subject, saying he would accompany them because he needed to settle something on Earth, and they ask if he was going to see family, which he denies, explaining that something had happened and he needed to go, because New Seoul would need more strength. And he says he didn't tell him earlier to avoid causing confusion among the citizens, but he would explain it better once they arrived on Earth. Speaking of which, things were a bit complicated in Korea. In the news, another coup in North Korea had been reported. Its leader was General Lee Suk-ga of Gori, and he claimed to have come from a place called Nova. The population was in shock at the fact that there was another planet beyond Earth being inhabited by people. At last, the truth had been revealed. Colonel Jang Mi-ran and Second Lieutenant Oh Ju-hwan watched the television with surprise and disgust. A rookie from North Korea organized a coup, and now everyone knows about the existence of planet Nova, she says, and the young man desperately asks to be sent to New Seoul. The warden glares at him angrily, unable to believe he wanted to go back when he was there precisely to deal with those resisting the military. And she claims that even Director Park was acting suspiciously, which leaves the second lieutenant confused. But the colonel explains that the way he was gaining power by helping Kang was dangerous, which to say a coup couldn't happen there too. That was absurd, and the young man didn't understand how she could suspect the greatest contributor to New Seoul, and even the MC was helping bring great things to the city. But she was the one who didn't understand her subordinates' excessive trust in just some old man. It seemed like there was a special reason behind it. And he says there was nothing special, it was just that Kang reminded him of himself 2 years ago. Flashbacks of a battle he had won against monsters on the other planet come to mind long before he joined the army. He and his friend boasted about the number of beasts they had defeated, and the young man remembers how much he liked Nova as it allowed him to grow stronger and create a world of freedom. He constantly challenged himself to keep moving forward. Hearing that, the woman simply responds that she couldn't send him to Nova. They needed to strengthen national power here. However, he slams his hand on the table, saying he was tired of so much military theory and he should be on the other planet. Upon announcing that he was leaving Earth, Jang Mi-ran yells that it was absurd for him to want to be discharged at a time like that. But the young man counters, saying that to strengthen national power, they had to explore Nova before the others, and he already knew who was going to lead the exploration. On the road, the gray-haired girl asks how her big brother was doing, but he shuts her down, saying he never had a sister like her. Jin asks how the bandits knew they would meet him at the portal, and one of them explains that they had been taking turns standing in front of the portal, considering the chaos there. Kang thanks them and asks how the company Ilho had started was going, trying to remember the name. That makes the woman laugh, as the name would be a surprise. They had simply called the place Cheoldu Services. Upon seeing him, Ilho celebrates the arrival of his boss, who laughs at being called that. He praises the guy's company but asks why he gave it that name, since they weren't criminals and it was a place very close to home. Then the entrepreneur apologizes, asking if Kang didn't like it. The MC denies it but explains that his grandfather wouldn't like it, and now Ilho understood why the old man had sent the workers away when they knocked on his house. Either way, he congratulates him on the growth of the company, and given the situation, having a business was a great thing. The gesture sends the subordinate over the moon with gratitude. A rough-looking guy enters the shop asking what kind of scene was that and if Kang had been a gangster before. He recognizes him immediately. It was the soldier he had fought some time ago. So he asks how his arm was, and the man says it was fine now. The boy asks what those grumpy-looking men were doing there, which makes the protagonist nudge Ilho, saying he had warned him. And the long-haired man explains that they weren't gangsters but rather a company supporting the mercenaries, something the soldier had already heard about, commenting that they had evolved. He says he has a proposal in case they were looking for more members, and Kang interrupts to say he would be more than welcome there even before he finished speaking. Extending a hand to the man, he says no introductions were needed and confirms he was there to join the group, and the soldier nods. He explains that he had come to see if the warrior was someone he could trust his life with, sealing the deal with a handshake. That single gesture is enough for the young man to feel how much stronger Kang had gotten in such a short time. Taking advantage of the moment, the buff guy offers the position of mercenary trainer to the newcomer, who wonders why he's being so well received without even introducing himself. But he replies that they had already crossed paths, offering his special test to the soldier if he wanted it, and the man says he's no longer a soldier, just the trainer of the mercenaries. Smiling, Kang introduces himself as the leader of the group. Convinced, Oh Jun-won ends the conversation, saying he'll be waiting for him in New Seoul. Nearby, Kang's grandfather asks what the friends were doing there right during the commotion, recommending they flee to a safe place. But the man can only think about the soup in front of him. Then Jin says it's New Year's, and his grandson's soldier friend assured him there wouldn't be any war now. But even so, the old man knew there were better places to be. Changing the subject, the little one asks if that pot wasn't too big for the three of them. But he knew his grandson well. He was always hungry. He asks why he was looking for alcohol so quickly, suggesting he was trying to act like an adult. With a full mouth, Kang says he wanted his first drink to be with his grandfather, like in a coming-of-age ceremony. The barbarians had that ceremony when they turned 18. In that ritual, they would be reborn as barbarian warriors. They received marks on their backs, which would become a source of pride from then on. Thoughtful, the warrior wondered if he could be reborn as a true barbarian now. He picks up the shot glass, managing to see his child reflection in the glass. Yeah, maybe it wasn't time yet. The old man scolds him, telling him to hold it with both hands, and explains that when drinking with someone older, he should turn his body slightly. He asks if Jin shouldn't go home, but the nerd says he's just an illegitimate, unregistered child to his family, and they were happier without his presence. The friend's eyes fill with hatred as he smiles maliciously, saying he could take care of that if he wanted, which Jin denies, calling him crazy. Since the little guy's life didn't seem easy, the old man pours him a shot, and the boy thanks him for taking care of him. Affectionately, the old man says all of Kang's friends were like his own grandkids. Finally, they toast in celebration of the duo's growth and progress. The next day, Jin wakes up exhausted, suggesting it was because of the amount of food from the night before. But when he asks if his friend is feeling okay, he's unshaken, laughing, saying he had already digested everything, and hurrying him to return to Nova. When they arrive at the portal, a crowd is in the area and even the number of soldiers had increased. Jin thought the people were there to take the test and enter the new planet, now that they knew it existed. The MC worries that his grandfather would also have to take the test, and even with good gear, it wouldn't be easy for the old man. Sighing, he tries to reassure himself and his friend, saying they find a way to sort it out. Already in Nova, Park meets with the two to suggest an alliance since the competition between nations would only grow the planet's exploration era. So it would be great if the army and the stubborn mercenaries officially led the exploration. Kang asks if he just needed to sign, and the old man laughs, saying he could be fooled if he didn't read the documents, but he believed there was no deceit between friends, and thanks him for the trust in such an important mission, asking if there were nations ahead of Korea, but the only one close was Japan. Opening his map, the warrior says they had to quickly prepare for exploration, starting with expanding the area of the map they had. He comments that Kim Chun-ba had suggested that to break territorial barriers, they would have to defeat the bosses of the explored fields, which was news to Park. Then he asks if he was referring to the Cyclops, and upon realizing the old man also knew about the bosses, his expression lights up. The general says not to underestimate the army's intelligence since they already knew the villain's location thanks to Captain Choi Jun-seop and Sergeant Kai Yong-soo. Kang's eyes sparkle upon hearing the two names, concluding that it was a mission to eliminate the big boss. Confident, Park says everything was already planned, they just needed to take action. He extends his hand to the buff guy, who seals the deal, saying he would definitely come back with his opponent's head split in a single blow. Sometime later, the warrior introduces Jung-won as the new captain to his tribe, and tells everyone there to welcome him, which they do, celebrating among themselves the fact they were finally free from Kang's brutal training. The young man introduces himself formally and wishes that everyone would follow his orders without further issues. Hugging Jin, the protagonist asks him to keep focusing on managing their weapons and supplies like he did before. The newcomer calls his attention, asking where to start the training, but it was obvious to the leader, who states that he should decide that, which makes the young man boil, arguing that surely he had thought of something when he appointed him captain. But the buff guy denies it and tells him to do whatever he thinks is best, which Kwon didn't seem to like very much. So he decides to start by reorganizing the troop structure, and smiles wickedly as he informs them that they would undergo hellish training to be in shape to defeat the boss, asking them to forget about rest for today because they would be training all day. Realizing the situation would get worse, the soldiers fear for their lives. Far from there, in Osaka, Japan, a young man was walking down the street looking at something on his phone, when suddenly a woman runs past him screaming for help. How rude, how could someone bump into another person and walk off without even apologizing? However, the young man soon notices that several citizens were running in the same direction. They were shouting that someone was after everyone, which triggers an alert in the blonde. Green lights appear in the sky before revealing their true nature, several goblins, coming from Nova and hungry for people. Suddenly, several little windows open in front of each person there. The same window that informed Kang and Jin about the end of the world, stating that the only way to survive was to go to Nova. Back on the planet 5 days later, the general became aware of this situation on Earth, which led the government to declare martial law in the city. He asked the informant if the end of the world was getting even closer, and if they had already discovered the cause, but the young man says the government was reluctant to share. This leaves the old man thoughtful. Apparently, humans hardly ever consider the portal opening as a possibility, and the young man agrees but didn't understand the relevance of the information. And the old man explains that ever since the end was discovered, the exploration of the other planet became a goal for all nations. But if these portals opened anywhere, wouldn't it be easier to produce apprentices en masse? That made sense, as it would increase the workforce in Nova, which would give Korea an advantage in the exploration. However, Park still didn't understand how they managed to open the portal. When an idea crosses his mind, he asks what Kang's mercenaries were doing at that moment and says they should leave that night. Meanwhile, the group was training in search of millimetric perfection. The soldiers complained, saying Hwan was much smarter than Kang, so instead of getting beaten up, they were under mental torture. And the army captain comments on how funny it is that the mercenaries had more discipline than the military, while Hwan asks not to be called lieutenant. He asks why he came back, since when he left it seemed like he never wanted to return, but the man reveals that he found everything in the army too boring. Still, did he really have to go straight to the mercenaries? The friend asks if he got tired of Park's obsession concept, which was indeed part of the reason for his choice. His partner wants to know more about life in the new unit, since he seemed quite excited, but the young man only says that he organized that whole mess, and confesses it's kind of funny, since he was never that proactive during military service, and the colleague concludes that he's grown a lot, making him smile shyly. He remembers Kang and suggests he probably changed because his new captain was a decent person. Addressing the mercenaries, the warrior shouts for them to stop marching, stating they would camp there for the night. And everyone obeys, setting up their tents. In the meeting tent, the four of them discuss the next steps of exploration, deciding they would reach the desired destination before dawn. Koi Jun-seop nods and says it was time for a strategy meeting. Subjugating a field boss was like invading a cave in games. The area was in a domed forest, divided between the center and the outer forest, and each of these areas was guarded by tribes of werewolves and ogres, respectively. Kang asks if a head-on attack would be impossible, since they weren't big enemies, but the man explains that there were hundreds of werewolves, and more beyond that. Their attack timer would start as soon as they entered the forest, meaning they had to defeat their opponents within the time limit. The captain recalls a previous battle where he was teleported out of the forest when time ran out. It really was like a game. This information makes the warrior thoughtful about a quick way to defeat them. One of them asks him to give the orders already, which makes him frown. It was the newcomer, stating that they would follow anything he said. He smiles, determined to go after this Cyclops everyone keeps talking about. With the beginning of dawn, the Cyclops subjugation event begins, counting the group's attack time. The plan was for Kim Jin-tae's unit to surround the left side of the forest. It was a tribe formed by ex-bandits, so the worse the terrain, the better for them. Soon they attacked the werewolves, using their horses and the strikes they had learned in training. However, eventually they would hit their limit, and those dogs recovered much faster. This stresses the team out, but at that moment, Jin would give them a signal for Young-Soo's team to show what they were capable of while the rest recovered. This would easily distract the beast's attention, as they'd have to focus on dodging arrows while Kang swiftly passed through them. That way, they should manage to reach the entrance to the central forest, where they spotted two massive ogres. Kang asks if the two soldiers thought they could handle that alone, but they were convinced it wouldn't be a problem, since only that duo could face the creatures. While they were busy fighting, the warrior would continue along the ravine, shouting that he'd arrive in 20 minutes. He urges Sonata forward, activating his trot skill, and easily takes down one of the ogres in his path, earning a new skill called mounted combat. If everything went according to plan, they would meet the Cyclops within the estimated time. The barbarian continues riding with his horse but pulls back upon reaching the desired location. However, he didn't see any boss nearby. Touching a tree, he wonders if it was some kind of sanctuary. Immediately, the tree lights up and a small window informs him that it is the World Tree, and its guardian would appear to test Kang's qualifications. A massive yellow spiral appears in the sky, and then the Cyclops arrives, emerging from that light at an absurd size. Even so, the MC doesn't seem intimidated at all. On the contrary, he looks very excited about the size of the beast before him. Promptly, the Cyclops raises its weapon to intimidate the opponent with a ground strike. Even for Kang, the reach of the attack was threatening, and he was very frightened. In the next attempts, the beast tries to attack him, and he uses the defense skill. Even so, his opponent didn't seem to tire, and even mana defenses didn't have the expected effect. Surely it was due to the Cyclops' enormous body. Grinding his teeth, the MC concludes that long-distance fighting wouldn't work against such a long hafted weapon. So the new plan was to start from the lower parts, slashing its legs with his axe. But the enemy remains intact. To say nothing happened would be false. The guy managed to leave a small scratch. So it wasn't like ogre's skin, since the creature was so large that even brute attacks didn't leave marks. However, the warrior wouldn't give up so easily, and in this case, it was time for infinite axe swings. With a weapon as long as the monster's, it would be hard to hit an enemy directly in front. The Cyclops tries to counterattack with a stomp on the protagonist, who quickly invokes his defense, making the monster scream in pain. Realizing he heard it, Kang smiles like a madman, provoking it. However, the Cyclops' eye is taken by a frightening red light, which makes the boy realize he no longer had the upper hand. From the massive orb, a kind of beam shoots toward the barbarian. Luckily, he manages to dodge, but the creature keeps firing those beams. He coughs from the dust around him, recognizing that the opponent was a terrifying and unblockable creature. The little window warns him that only 5 minutes remain before the battle ends, which didn't seem like enough. However, from afar, the 2 soldiers who had accompanied him earlier appear, shouting that they heard the explosion and came to check if he was okay. With no warm welcome, Kang tells them to dodge as he notices another attack from the giant. He celebrates their arrival and they ask what he wants them to do. So he commands them to try to hit the open wound on the enemy's leg while he distracts it. And so they did, with the warrior provoking it face to face. He knew that stare could end someone quickly, but it wasn't invincible, because he had noticed a pattern between the intervals of the light beam attacks. While they fought, the boy mocks, asking if a guardian could destroy trees like that. How contradictory. Now less than 2 minutes remained, and they had to find a way to deal with that beast fast. Finally, the 2 humans managed to strike both legs of the monster, which immediately falls to the ground. Kang even mocks it, saying that's what happens when you skip leg day. Seeing the time running out, he calls for Sonata because one of the ways to finish off a beast was with a precise blow. But his thoughts are overtaken by his inner child. He was in the middle of a forest after his father had passed on. Because of that, his inner growth seemed to have stopped. All that remained was hatred for his own weakness, regret, and anger. But he couldn't keep living like that. Now he had friends and subordinates to protect, and the weight of responsibility had grown. It was time to let go of the sadness and truly evolve, not for himself, but to protect those who were important to him. It was through constant mental training that he realized a principle he can rely on due to his young body. Back in the tension of battle, the warrior jumps onto Sonata as she runs toward him. Then he leaps off the horse, because it was time to use the principle, focus all the power he had into a single point. His axe emanates a violet aura, invoking the power of the ogre. There's no time for the monster to react as the boy is already screaming in its face. Now it was his turn to fight, and with just one blow, he manages to split the beast in half. A massive explosion throws the boy far away. However, on the small window, his victory is confirmed. The yellow tree shines again, informing him that he could now explore the previously protected area. Jin celebrates the group's victory, and the soldiers congratulate their leader, who is happy for having broken the barrier by defeating the field boss. Additionally, they now had an incredible weapon. Suddenly, a mission window appears, informing them they must begin exploration and go outside to tame him out. Kang comments that apparently all the rookies would be able to use horses now, and Jin concludes that the method of the bandit riders wasn't the standard for Nova's system. He celebrates as he could turn all his subordinates into knights, but Kai Yong-su scolds him, saying they should diversify their groups to be prepared for anything. The protagonist sighs and asks if that reward wasn't kind of underwhelming, considering all the hard work they had done. The group's attention is taken when the world tree begins to shine. When a blue portal opens in front of them, they immediately think another Cyclops is about to come out. However, a disgusting little green foot is the first thing they see. It was a goblin carrying a bag full of coins, telling them to hurry and grab whatever they wanted. The jaws of our boys dropped to the ground upon seeing it. It was a goblin merchant. Meanwhile, on planet Earth, the president of Korea receives a $1 billion proposal from Japan to share information about Nova's opening. The man was already at a disadvantage either way, so he says they'd negotiate right away. But his subordinate explains that it was impossible because the country was not mentioned as a target of negotiations this time, which makes the man slam the table in frustration. He tries to explain that, according to the Japanese embassy in Korea, the country's situation would only be discussed near summer, and the president shouts that it's still half a year away. That was the equivalent of 3 years in Nova, which was absurd. The man was scowling at all the excitement of other nations trying to take power over the new planet. The subordinate receives some messages and apologizes for the interruption, but the old man says he can check what it's about. But just as he's about to hang up the phone, something catches his attention, and he exclaims that something had happened. The man remains grumpy, as he didn't know what he was talking about. Then the Four Eyes says that goblins appear at the Paju portal, meaning there was a portal to Nova in Korea, and his superior's expression changes completely. But he tries to contain himself, saying it's still not the time to celebrate since Paju is very close to the capital, and the secretary says he'll call for an emergency meeting. Before leaving, the president tells the subordinate to contact Director Park Jun-pil so he can come to them immediately. In Nova, small windows informed its inhabitants about the expansion of the planet's area, and Chunba is shocked by the collapse of the barrier. His subordinates shout as they see the mist covering the place disappear, asking if someone had defeated the field boss, and he smiles knowing exactly who it was. Even so, he remains impressed with Kang Cheolju's abilities. At the Nova Soul base, Park celebrates the team's victory, saying that the new area being recognized as Earth territory meant that the portal had also opened there. Getting ready to leave, he says it still wasn't the time as they had to prepare before that place turned into Osaka. But his informant rushes into the room. He immediately thinks he came to talk about the new area and starts showering Kang with compliments, but the young man interrupts him, saying it was something even more important, and informs him that the president had called him to a meeting on Earth because of the portal opening in Paju, which leaves the old man in disbelief. But he calms down, asking him to use the fastest portal to Seoul, though such a portal didn't exist, and the chief laughs, saying it was just a joke. Back with the group of heroes, the goblin keeps insisting that they take advantage of the rare opportunity they had. His catalog was packed with items, and Kang quickly selects a red talisman that increased the limit of his levels. The guy's eyes shine with the possibility of infinite growth, deciding to buy 10 of each color, but Jin warns him that was all the money he had. But he wanted to reach level 100, so he makes a considerable request. Now he just needed to distribute the magic stones, and one of the soldiers says he should be the first to use them. Kang asks what the advantages of becoming a ranker were, and Han Siop explains that you could know your strength, revealing that he was number 913 in perception, which was quite low. However, the warrior asks how he knew his ranking without competing against everyone in front of him. And the human explains that rankers could compete in a kind of level meter, and the existence of that alone is enough to shock the big guy. Picking up one of the stones, he asks why the guy was only telling him those things now. After equipping himself with the orbs and magic stones, he smiles determinedly and says, "Since there's such an amazing place, let's go check it out." Arriving at the competition site, he finds a white and empty landscape. A little window informs him about the first test, which would be a health test. For that, he had to run as fast as possible, which was a bit anticlimactic for the warrior. However, a massive pillar sprouts from the ground in front of him, which catches his attention. He climbs it, making sure he really just needed to run, which was very simple. But the guy was great at doing simple things, and he starts running, determined not to stop until his lungs exploded. Far from there, in the office of Japan's Prime Minister, the secretary informs that Seto's special forces defeated a field boss, which makes him celebrate. The minister orders him to increase the reward for portal opening information by 5 times to solidify his position as Nova's leader. However, another man runs in and says there's a major problem, but the superior only notices the rudeness of him entering without knocking. He ignores the reprimand to show the chief a news report about another portal that had opened in Korea, which shocks the minister. The newspaper showed a Korean soldier stating that with the opening, it would take the lead by informing other nations as a moral duty. The parliamentarian clenches his fist upon learning that even the portal's information had already been revealed. His secretary suggests that the Koreans must be secretly training with a special weapon, and he yells, telling him to find out who that person was. Even though they tried to hide the information to gain an advantage, one nation was already aware of the situation. In this case, the Republic of Korea declared the era of dimensional exploration, according to Director Park. At the emergency meeting, the president of Korea and the old man met, while the former congratulated him for achieving something so important. He explains he was planning to establish an army in Nova and suggests that Park go to the barracks there to lead the soldiers, but the old man carefully declines. The chief argues that Nova Seoul was already well established for someone else to take care of, and with the experience he had gained, he hoped he would help his nation again. Park thinks before asking that if it came to that, he'd be sent to Cheongju, making his companion question the reason for that choice. Then he reveals that he wanted to make Cheongju the center of Korea's portals to turn it into a capital. Hearing that, the superior agrees it's a great idea and says there's no one better than him to execute it, calling him director but correcting himself. Someone like him should have a title that matched him, so he appoints him General Park, the new person in charge of the Cheongju portal. On the other planet, Kang continued his tests, euphoric with the result. As expected, there was no one ahead of him in the health rank. When he finally returns from the testing site, his friends were waiting for him anxiously. Jin runs up to him, excited to know his placement, and he brags, stating he was first, which surprises the soldiers. One of them asks how many shot points he earned, and he replies with 25, meaning he scored 2,500 points. He was impressed, asking what he did with the points, but the MC just expanded his inventory and saved part of them to use when he ranked in other stats. He asks if there was anyone who ranked first in everything, and his friend says no, because people prioritized the areas they wanted to boost for benefits. Hearing the explanation, Kang decides his new focus would be reaching first place in everything, and Jin asks if the group would still hunt more before returning, and the boy nods. They hadn't completed the night's mission yet, so the MC asks Jungwon to go with the mercenaries to look for horses, and Jin asks what the two of them would do. Smiling at Sanada, the warrior explains that since the barrier had been destroyed, it was time for them to see what lay beyond it. Days later, the new General Park prepares for his departure. Looking at the moon, he grows reflective about the moment. He asks his subordinate if he had done what was asked, and the young man confirms, saying Colonel Kim Jun-soo would handle everything, but the old man didn't trust him. So he yells from afar for him to take care of the new commander as soon as he arrives, and the sleepy-faced man says he'll manage. And he grumbles about the guy meddling even at the time of departure. As soon as he hears that, Lee sweeps the lazy guy's legs, knocking him to the ground. Feigning innocence, she asks if she bumped into him and apologizes falsely, even though he knew it was on purpose. The old man is surprised to see the woman there, as he didn't think he'd see her before leaving, but she says she came running back as soon as she heard, surprised by his choice of new home. He laughs awkwardly, and the girl finds an opening to ask that they be taken to Cheonju, arguing that there were few warriors there, but he says it's not possible. As she tries to argue, Lee is interrupted by her superior, who says Nova Seoul would only remain intact with her there, and besides, he was no longer the director of the unit. She sighs, understanding, and asks what kind of person the new commander was. But before there's a response, the portal shines intensely, drawing everyone's attention. Suddenly, a man steps out of the portal, rumbling that this was the place he'd be commanding. Everyone is shocked by his presence. The new commander was a pot-bellied old man named Jin, and all he did was complain about how backward the place was. Far from there, Jin and Kang were riding beyond the former border. They were in a place covered in ice, which made the two of them shiver from the seasonal change. When they entered, they encountered a very dry climate. Then they reached a damp point where it rained all day. Apparently, each map had its own characteristics. Even the monsters typical to each region were different. It was very vast to explore. Kang comments that by crossing the new continent, they might find places connected to other portals, and Jin thinks that's likely. Changing the subject, he asks what the MC was doing, but he doesn't understand the question. The buff guy was curling up, trying to protect himself from the cold, and the nerd smirks as he comments that overskin didn't work against everything. So they'd agree to return to camp, as the mercenaries should have completed their mission by then. Later, they would return with proper equipment. In the city of Nova Seoul, Lee was walking with her head down. Only 10 days had passed since Park's departure, but a lot had changed. The new commander built a golf course in the middle of the base and paid people in peanuts for their work, which pleased no one. In addition, prices had risen due to the excessive development he was forcing. Basically, he was turning Nova Seoul into a kind of luxury bunker, which didn't seem very effective for protecting citizens. Lost in thought, someone calls for Major Lee, informing her that Kang and his group had returned. And there they were, mounted on their horses. Seeing the state of the city, the protagonist is filled with rage, shouting to know who had destroyed their home, calling for Junpil immediately, and Lee quickly tells him he's not there. He is surprised by the woman's presence but asks what she meant by that, and the girl explains that the old man had been transferred. The mercenary soldiers are stunned, asking who had done all this then. So the woman explains that it was the work of the new commander of Nova Seoul, who, by the way, was waiting for the return of the mercenary leader. More furious than the devil, Kang commands his subordinates to head to the central government office, and everyone rushes out, determined to reclaim their home and show their strength. Meanwhile, at the office, Jin asks his colonel if everything is ready to welcome the warrior, and he confirms, explaining that in addition to soldiers, he had gathered ex-soldiers to form an army of more than 600 people hidden throughout the village. The man praises him, as he knew Kang needed to be by his side, whether by force or not, and the subordinate nods. He was convinced that, as impressive as Kang was, he was still just a kid, but a tremor interrupts him, and he asks if it's an earthquake or something. His secretary looks out the door and says it's nothing like that. It's the stubborn mercenaries trotting in with all their speed and imposing presence. The new commander gathers his men, who position themselves in front of the group of mercenaries, and he welcomes the group's captain, who roars, asking if it was him who destroyed their home. But the secretary is quicker and calls him spoiled and insolent, saying that was the new army commander and he deserved respect. Stressed, the warrior lifts the man by his head and says he doesn't care about that. The question was whether it was him who destroyed their home. He even tries to mumble a reply, but it's incomprehensible with that big hand over his mouth. Mockingly, the old man says that now he understands why the mercenary captain was so upset. Kang abruptly drops the guy and tells him to stop laughing and start explaining. Then Jin explains that this was now his territory and to occupy it one had to pay. Since they hadn't, he decided to demolish the abandoned site. The protagonist argues that he received the land from Junpil, so there was no reason to pay for using the space. But the human insists that this was his land now, so everyone had to follow his rules. And he smiles wickedly, asking Kang not to act like that. All he had to do was join him, and he'd get as much land as he wanted for free. A vein bulges in the boy's neck. He couldn't believe that nonsense about getting things for free. So he explodes, shouting for him to stop stalling and give back what was his. But the man isn't intimidated and says that if Kang wanted to act that way, then fine. And he informs the army that all rebels should be eliminated immediately from that point forward. With arrows ready to fire, Jin commands them to finish off Kang's mercenaries. But the men have no fear at all, laughing at the soldiers who were hiding. All it would take was for their captain to give the order, and they'd wipe them out. However, Kang advances alone and silently, leaving them confused, which makes Jin shout for his soldiers to get ready, as he'd now put him in his place. The army mocks their opponents, wondering what they would even do. But Kang interrupts them with rage in his eyes, telling them to shut up and declaring that if they dared to advance, they were toast. Seeing his subordinates intimidated, the old man asks what the hell they were doing, falling for that bluff. The warrior turns to face the commander, but his friends grab him, asking him to resolve this through conversation before everything gets out of control. And the duo draws Im Eun-jin's attention, who questions whether they weren't soldiers. He calls for Major Lee, who presents herself from behind the man, and he emphasizes that she was the best swordswoman in Nova Seoul, and she says she was. Then the man promises to give her a promotion if she subdued Kang quickly, but the woman sighs, explaining that she couldn't defeat him. Furious, he yells that his orders weren't a joke, and she was far too bold to answer him like that. However, the young woman laughs, asking if he was really that kind of person. He was worse than she thought, and the man says he'll show her just how bad he could be, raising his hand to strike the girl. But our warrior promptly stops him, saying it seemed like the old man didn't really know how things worked around there, surprising him. Kang explains that the mercenaries were not threats to the citizens, much less criminals who fought over anything. However, as he crushes his hand, he says they had no mercy for those who tried to fight against them. Finally, he asks if, knowing all that, he still had the courage to fight him, as the soldiers stared in shock. One by one, the soldiers dropped their weapons, giving up fighting against such imposing men. Besides, Kang was a hero to the city. With that shift, one of the archers agrees, adding that they weren't even under a military regime anymore, and he preferred to fight alongside the mercenaries. Lee is surprised by the shouts of agreement coming from the army. All this time, it wasn't the city or the military that protected the citizens, but rather the tireless strength of Kang Chil-du, who made everyone come together. She turns to her friend but is interrupted by the old man, who yells about how useless she is just standing there while her superior is in danger. The woman quickly draws her katana, stating she has no choice in this situation. Then she kneels in front of Kang and declares that she would fight only for him. She adds that New Seoul was already done for and she couldn't see a future there, but she could see a future in Kang, a future that would light up Nova entirely. Without much emotion, the warrior thanks her and asks her to join the team, welcoming an excellent swordswoman. The commander even tries to reprimand her, but she only asks him to process her discharge. That fills him with fury. How could she be leaving the army at a time like that? But in the end, it was her decision. She even teases the old man, telling him to speak with her new superior if he has any complaints. Kang turns his attention to the central problem, revenge for the destruction of his home, but the guy doubted he'd go through with it since he'd become a target of the Korean army. The warrior starts to say that in the past he would have minced that chicken's neck, but they could settle it with a simple payment for the value of the land where his base used to be, and of course, a reward for completing the mission given by Junpil. Later, the battle tension had passed and everyone was eating together. Our boy finally finds out what happened to the former director, and Lee asks what he would do with his unit now. He says he was planning to explore beyond the border, but without military support, he had to worry about making a living, and Jin suggests they head to Jeonju. Since it was a new place, there was a lot to explore and possibly field bosses. The little one asks if everyone agrees with the move, and since everyone seems to agree, Kang wouldn't oppose it. But one of the soldiers asks why he looks like he needs to use the bathroom. He explains he was worried about leaving the two behind, but Lee says it would be hard to take Choi, since his mother was in the hospital, and Yang wouldn't go without him. The captain would need hospitals and military salaries that weren't available in Nova. Jin worries about the situation, while the warrior seems to be thinking of a solution. However, soon an idea pops into his head, and he says Jin would have to visit the old brothers in the countryside. Leaving a meeting room with Im Eun-jin, Yang asks his friend how the meeting went. Sadly, Choi says they didn't allow his transfer to Cheonju and his comrades' size, but it was expected, so all they could do was follow orders. But the protagonist approaches the two, and they immediately ask what he's doing there. For Kang, it was obvious. He came to take him along. Far from there, the three gather so the MC can explain the situation. Understanding everything, Choi recommends his partner go to Cheonju, even without him. But the warrior had something in mind and asks if he would go too if he could ensure his family's safety, which leaves him confused. Then he explains they were leading a company for life support in Nova called Chil-du Services. The name makes Choi ask if it's a gang, which the guy quickly denies, saying it's just a business to protect and take care of the mercenaries' families. Yang is proud of the leader while the captain tries to process it all. And extending his hand, the barbarian invites them to go with him and the mercenaries to the new city. Besides them, they would call on citizens who were suffering under Im Eun-jin's new regime. A few days later, Kang had crossed the portal in Paju. Observing his surroundings, he couldn't help but notice the daily changes in the place. Apparently, the government's announcement about Nova had sped things up around there. While walking, a military car pulls up beside him, leaving him intrigued. Lieutenant Choi Sung-a gets out of the vehicle, saying what a coincidence it is to find him there. He struggles to remember the woman who explains she's with Jun Hwan. Though it works, the MC doesn't understand why she's acting like she knows him, and the girl reveals she has a message from Junpil. She says she's part of Cheonju's intelligence platoon, and finally delivers the message. Kang would be taken to New Cheonju. The guy smiles, moving forward so they don't waste more time, but the woman asks if he's not going to ride with her. Then Kang explains that he has a large group with him, so they have to go separately. Besides, that group was just arriving. A fleet of buses parks near the two and Ilho greets him. Once again, the protagonist reminds him that they weren't criminals to be dressed like that, and the guy apologizes. He says Jin Ta had already informed him of everything, so he had prepared the buses for the mercenaries and citizens, which makes Kang very grateful to his friend. However, the vice captain states that the number of people brought was smaller than expected, and the MC shrugs. It seems that relocating out of nowhere was an issue. The mercenaries would also come later, and all they could do was respect them, since they were starting a new life in the rural city. That's why he brought people from the village to help in this beginning, among them the old lady who offered him soup and the blacksmith. Finally, he bids farewell to the lieutenant, stating they would leave at that moment, and continuing the journey, the warrior assures they will eventually stop somewhere to rest. Upon crossing the portal, the view leaves the buff guy in awe. The place had grown quite a bit in the meantime. Even its scale was impressive, and the people dressed in a sophisticated way, clearly showing General Park's influence. It was like a second version of New Seoul. Speaking of him, the old man waves at the two friends, accompanied by his informant and another girl. They greet each other like old friends, and Kang confesses he had been worried when he heard Park had been expelled from the other city, but that wasn't the case. He says he nearly crushed his replacement, and the general celebrates the fact that he didn't go through with that, welcoming him warmly. Upon hearing that there were some gifts for him, the old man's face lights up with surprise and joy. They were the merchants from New Seoul, who smiled as they came through the portal. The warrior explains that to establish a village there, they had to start with a commercial district. And since he was worried about his friend being alone, he brought those who wanted to come. Shaking the blacksmith's hand, Park celebrates the arrival of the companions, saying they were exactly the people needed to speed up development in Nova. And he thanks the barbarian, wanting to know how to repay him for the gesture. But the young man expected nothing in return, and it could be considered reimbursement for taking his subordinates. Suddenly, two very familiar faces come through the portal. It's Lee and Captain Choi, who greet the old man, who is shocked by their presence. Downcast, he concludes that the two really had decided to leave the military behind. However, he quickly drops the act in a big laugh, saying it was a great decision and he couldn't be happier to have everyone there in Cheonju. Then he invites everyone to enjoy a delicious feast, and the group follows him. As they walk, Kang questions what kind of place this village was, suggesting it looked like a second version of New Seoul. Proudly, Park presents the place as Hanyang, an agricultural society which allowed future residents to always have something to eat, surrounded by forts to prepare for monster attacks. And with the development of the road, it would become a trade center capable of interacting with continents in all directions. The warrior praises his management of the place, and the old man is proud of having found rice in the area, which was a major differentiator in Nova. That alone is enough to make him drool, excited at the idea of eating soup with real rice, and his friend laughs at the enthusiasm. But the old man grabs the boy's hands, reminding him that he had called him there for something more important than soup, which the MC doubted even existed. However, the invitation he had was indeed very interesting. He wanted them to try to explore a hidden dungeon that surprises the group, who stare at him curiously. Continuing the walk, Park tells the buff guy that he had discovered something incredible recently, and the MC wonders what it could be. It was a magic teleportation circle, something he considered the future means of transport for the place. He explains that he discovered it by accident while patrolling in the late afternoon. It was a structure that allowed dimensional movement between other circles. If they found others, they could transport directly between the novas, which impresses Kang, and Park says the idea was to connect the place in Hanyang with a road. However, the old man mentions that the desired route was being blocked by the dungeon in question, so they couldn't even get close. That's why he asked him to come. Exploring a dungeon was beyond his current capabilities, and he needed the strength of the mercenaries. Speaking of them, the guy remembers that the group would need a base in the village, and Kang's eyes turn demonic when he hears the proposal to build a new base while they go into the cave. Upon arriving at the castle, Kang comments on its beauty, while Jin says the atmosphere there felt different, and even the mercenaries seemed scared. Seeing two of them nearly crap themselves in fear, the leader says that those who were scared could stay outside if they wanted to. But he pulls out his axe and stares at them seriously, reinforcing that it was only if they were truly scared, and the gesture is enough to make them decide to enter. Advancing with his cavalry, the protagonist calls everyone to grab their weapons. However, before even entering, the group is surprised by arrows flying in their direction. Because of that, the horse's movement becomes impossible. Kang observes the attack from a distance, concluding that they wouldn't be able to get through to the dungeon so easily. From there, an army of skeletons continues firing, so the warrior charges forward alone and orders his soldiers to gather the scattered mercenaries and wait a bit, causing Choi and Yang to shout after him. With red eyes, Kang declares that he would bring down the castle gate. He commands Sonana to start trotting quickly, getting closer and closer to the target. One of the skeletons is in shock at the guy's approach, even under fire. Near the door, the barbarian yells for the horse to destroy the gate with a headbutt, activating one of his strength abilities. The skeletons descend in desperation upon seeing the buff guy had managed to invade the castle, but he doesn't seem too concerned. When one of the scrawny ones tries to attack him, he grabs it easily, possessed by adrenaline, and says he's a steelhead. Outside, the mercenaries charge toward the castle upon realizing the arrows have stopped. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Kang wastes no time attacking the skeleton army. Complaining, he comments that at this pace, he finished before his subordinates even arrived, and asks if there wasn't anyone stronger around. As he finishes the sentence, a gigantic knight appears next to him. But, as always, he's not intimidated, striking the monster quickly while mocking it. He taunts, asking if that's all it had to offer in a fight, and adds that compared to the Cyclops, it was nearly a dead fly. Then he lands a final blow with his axe, making the opponent fall to its knees before him. Indeed, he had faced a pretty lame monster. However, the guy wonders why it hadn't dropped any items yet, even after being defeated. Finally, his army enters the place, and Kang laughs, saying he's fine, and they arrive long after he did all the work. Moving forward, he asks that part of the group stay outside while the others go in, warning that they'd probably encounter enemies inside, and Jin gets nervous. He shouts for his friend to dodge, but something hits him from behind without him noticing. It was the opponent he had sworn to defeat just now, the mansion's guardian. All of his subordinates are shocked to see the protagonist's back struck by the knight's sword. However, Kang doesn't cry, much less fall to the ground. He just fills with rage upon realizing he had let his guard down. Before the monster can attack again, Lee draws her katana and activates the mana condensation ability at maximum acceleration against the enemy. With that, she knocks him to the ground and runs to ask if her leader is okay. But he grits his teeth and says he hasn't died yet, leaving her confused. Looking back, the girl realizes that none of those creatures had died, not even the weak skeletons. She's stunned, but the warrior explains that those creatures were already lifeless, so they were controlled by the worst kind of magic, and he states that to finish them, they have to eliminate the master of that place. The buff guy commands the soldiers on his team to hold off the beasts as long as possible. However, before he moves forward, Lee asks him to wait. The woman says that even if he was going in, he should treat his wounds first, pulling band-aids from her inventory, and the MC thanks her for the gesture. Already bandaged, Kang gets ready to enter, saying he'd finish off that bastard quickly and come back to help them. Upon entering the castle, the smell of rot makes him nauseous, almost throwing up. When a creature comes in, he immediately thinks it's the boss, but it's just one of the dungeon monsters, the corpse golem. He celebrates the opponent's presence for breaking his boredom, but all he could think about were his wounds oozing juice, so he had to be quick. The monster charges at him, and Kang quickly readies his axe, striking it at the waist. However, he soon realizes it's a beast capable of regenerating when wounded. In that case, he'd have to think of something else. So he grabs his weapon filled with mana, doubting the monster could regenerate at the speed of his strikes. After a sequence of blows, the warrior fills with rage, shouting that this was the classic dismemberment of barbarians. By using both weapons at the same time, Kang awakens an ability called dual wielding, enhancing his power. However, the monster begins to regenerate from the attack, wrapping itself around the guy's body and leaving him stunned, not knowing how to fight it. Then he notices something inside the golem's body, a glowing red orb. Quickly, the MC stretches to grab that stone, even with difficulty. Upon succeeding, the creature transforms into a bandaged ball, becoming increasingly compact until it explodes. Kang crushes the orb with satisfaction, stating that a corpse should act like one, and that it should never return to life. His victory in the battle against that beast earns him a golem skill orb, which would definitely be very useful. Continuing his search for the dungeon's master, he comes across a long corridor that led to a massive door, behind which was his new enemy. So, from outside, the warrior yells to announce that he's there, demanding the enemy show up already. The door slowly opens to reveal the boss as a knight. The protagonist smiles at the appearance of Count Ryan, master of the castle. He pulls out his axe and asks if the noble prefers ribs or muscle. With no reply, the warrior cuts the small talk short, since his only goal there was to completely destroy him. He lands his first strike, which is blocked by the opponent with the sword. The clash continues intensely, as the Count is able to defend against all of the barbarians' attacks. Kang is already getting irritated by the knight's power, who moves masterfully with his flaming sword. It's as if his skin is burning. Just being near the monster makes his breathing labor and his vision blurry. So he activates his scanning ability to check the opponent's weapon skill level, only to confirm it's very high. However, he remembers the orb he collected minutes ago and chooses the regeneration ability from the previous enemy to keep fighting the Count. Now our boy was an invincible barbarian. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, the mercenaries continued fighting the other creatures. Choi motivated them to keep holding the line, even though they were exhausted. Jin seemed to be at his limit, while Lee fought the giant knight even though she was tired. Back to our boy, he was also exhausted, but he had in mind that everyone was waiting for him to return. He just needed to finish off that bastard. However, when he tries to strike once more, the bastard manages to split the warrior's weapon in two. He was screwed. He could barely defend with the weapon before, imagine now without it. The monster takes advantage of that to hit him, but Kang uses the broken handle to counter. The blows don't stop, and the creature attacks him relentlessly while blocking his escape route. In a moment of distraction, the warrior is nearly struck by the flaming blade, but manages to dodge just in time. However, that helps him identify how the beast attacks. Besides swinging its sword quickly, much of its power came from the movements it made with its feet, so he attacks the Count with everything he's got, and even the opponent becomes alert. All Kang needed to do was learn those movements in the time they had together to be able to master them and finally surpass the enemy's power. And so he does, increasing his proficiency with the axe, which allows him to see exactly where the sword would strike from. His face turns completely dark, with rage running through his veins. With a wicked smile, he says menacingly, "I warned you." When the knight charges at him, he is caught off guard by the warrior's expert attack. Ready for his final strike, the invincible hero points his mana charge axe at the opponent before putting him on the ground. Finally, the dungeon was cleared and that battle was over. And even with his weapon broken, he now possessed a flaming sword. On top of that, he had received a goddess's pendant, which replaced the nun's prayers for healing purposes. When he exits the castle, his friends celebrate his return. He didn't have a single scratch on him, which leaves the pair confused, but Kang decides not to give too many details. He immediately asks Choi how things were going at the moment, and the captain informs him they were still fighting, but 7 mercenaries were seriously injured. Smiling, the warrior says he'll take care of it, showing off his new necklace that served to heal his subordinates, impressing those who were healed. Jin asks how that works, and if they were now free of any wounds, but his friend explains it had a usage limit, and at the moment, only 3 were available. Sadly, the captain calls for his attention, apologizing as he informs him that 3 of the mercenaries couldn't be saved. There's not much ceremony, but everyone faces the passing of their comrades with respect. Seeing that scene, Kang blames himself for having taken so long inside, because he believed he could have prevented it. But he shakes off the thought, remembering that being sacrificed in battle was something noble, and he thanks the companions who gave their all. The MC asks if everyone there knew what had to be done for those who fell asleep with courage. Then he announces that he would turn that place into an untouchable fortress, using the power of Lord Seal. Now that was the main fortress, called the Castle of Steelheads. Back at the portal, Park thanks the warrior for clearing the path to build the road he had wanted so much, and asks how he feels now that he's a lord, which makes the guy smile smugly, stating it wasn't bad at all. He shares that he plans to bring the families of the mercenaries to the new city soon, which the old man thought was a great idea. Changing the subject, he asks if he can trust the young man enough to share confidential information, and the guy nods. The elder begins to explain that recently they had given information about the portal to the United States, and because of that, they discovered the cause of the apocalypse. Before revealing the reason, he asks the warrior not to be shocked by it, then says that the real cause was a zombie virus apocalypse. Kang furrows his brow, asking if that's really true, and the man confirms, saying he was already aware of cases of infected people. That was very dangerous, and the warrior asks if, in that case, they shouldn't stop bringing people into Nova, but it wasn't up to him, since it was a secret. However, if the virus became pandemic, it would be much harder to retrieve people from Earth, which makes the MC think of his grandfather. Even with the end of the world being revealed, there were people unwilling to relocate, just like the residents of Musul and Chinonju. So the boy suggests they reveal the virus to everyone, but Park immediately scolds him, stating it would be madness and everyone would panic. After all, they didn't have enough supplies for thousands of people to suddenly show up there, which made sense to the buff guy. Following that logic, he asks if the military was taking care of the preparations, and the government was planning to build barriers near the portals in Korea, like shelters, to then gradually bring them into Nova, so they have something to eat and a place to stay. That's why the old man wanted to ask Kang for something. He wanted his help to open the rest of the portals in Korea. In other words, he wanted him to defeat all the field bosses in Nova, since the new citizens would probably take too long to do that. However, the boy interrupts him, refusing the proposal. That was a surprise to Park, but he explains that from now on he planned to fight only for his tribe. The old man argues that he thought the two of them shared a similar worldview, and the young man apologizes, but he didn't fight for humanity. According to him, it was a luxury to fight for others when he couldn't protect his own family, remembering what happened with his 3 brothers. Meanwhile, on Earth, news about the apocalypse was spreading wildly. The government was asking all citizens to quarantine whenever possible until they could understand what was happening. But there was Kang's grandfather, walking down the street while complaining about the heat and the fact that his grandson hadn't sent him a message, when suddenly, a crazed goblin jumped on him, knocking him to the ground. He screams, startled, ready to meet his maker. However, the monster gets a kick to the face before it can do anything. It was one of the sisters, extending a hand and asking if the old man was okay. Even after being saved by her, he makes a grumpy face and tells the girl to leave. Another sibling asks him to eat a goblin coin, because only then could he enter Nova, and the stubborn man refuses again, telling them to eat it themselves. The girl gets angry and confronts him about hating them so much. Then he reveals that he was afraid his grandson would be corrupted by them, telling them never to go after him again because he didn't need help from criminals. The two stare at him nervously, but Kang appears behind them, assuring that they hadn't done anything wrong, and calls out to his grandfather, who is surprised by his presence. Holding a small potion, he asks if he has time to have a drink with his grandson after so long. Sitting at home, the young man comments that he heard the old man had started praying, and he explains it was because of him, since he couldn't sleep from so much worry, and he even scolds him for disappearing without giving any news. But the warrior takes the opportunity to remind him that he could stay by his side in Nova if he wished. He wants to know what he has to do to get the old man to go with him, worried about the new virus he didn't even know about yet. Besides that, he talks about the earlier incident, which only didn't turn into something tragic thanks to the siblings, and the old man quickly cuts him off. Slamming his glass on the table, he orders him not to mention those criminals again. When asked why he hated them so much, the old man says that criminals weren't the kind of people you could trust. Flashbacks of his shameful past come to mind, a past where he himself was a criminal. He says he was successful at work, the boss's favorite, and even became president of the company. However, whenever they had problems, it was his name they gave to settle the score. In the end, he was just a punching bag. The old man spent his whole youth in prison, and when he got out, he had nothing. But on the day he decided to end it all, he met Kang, still a child. Breaking the tension, the young man asks if he saved his life, to which the guy responds that he was very ungrateful. Back to the siblings, the warrior says that had nothing to do with them, and that they helped him earlier, but the old man pouts, saying he knew how to take care of himself. With an evil smile, he asks if his grandfather had never thought about getting revenge on those who hurt him, but he wasn't in the mood for a sudden ending, and besides, he didn't even know how he would get revenge. After all, his former boss's family was part of the Dongchun Group, a dangerous organization made up of various gangs. As night falls, Kim Dongchun, a gang member, pours a drink for his friend and partner Choi Do-sik, leader of the New Alliance gang, celebrating their success in Nova. Kim thanks him, and his partner asks what the reason for the invitation was. And the guy mentions that some kids from the company were in need of better upbringing, and the old man laughs, asking if he was offering his company. Suspicious, he asks why he would sell an entertainment company, since it seemed valuable in Nova, and his friend says he wanted to focus on hunting, which was his specialty. Finishing his drink, the bald guy asks him to say what he wanted in return. Then, Kim asks if they shouldn't open the Kangnam portal, since that way, Dongchun would secure dominance in the hunt. But the chubby one asks if he was sure, since it would be very dangerous. But the guy was confident that his team of hunters could handle it. Before he can give an answer, one of the guards rushes into the room, saying they had a problem. He says some guys had invaded the building and were causing a commotion, which raises an alarm for both negotiators. The chubby one starts to stand up, but Kim apologizes for the incident, asking him to stay calm. However, it's no use. Choi Do-sik leaves the room, saying he's disappointed and would return later, leaving the mustached man desperate. He takes out all of his anger on the guard, yelling at him to stop standing there like an idiot and to go inform Director Jang of what had happened. In the hallways, the organization's men were wiped out, lying around in every which way. O's sister asks Kang if they were doing well, but he has very high expectations for them, so he comments that they still had to improve. But they stop upon seeing their target, Director Jang, a classy old man with 30 years of experience in the organization. With his mouth full, the warrior asks if he was the boss around there, because if he was, he should come with them to his grandfather's house before the bread got cold. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.